The three humans and one lantern walked back to the building of the ancient battleship, and suddenly a light twinkled. It wasn't known where that light had come from, but the entire ship was bathed in intense light which caused Qin Mu, village chief, and the rest to be unable to see anything. The light appeared quickly and disappeared quickly. When the light vanished, Qin Mu examined the surroundings, and he was slightly stunned. This ship was originally sailing under the Celestial River, but now it was sailing on the surface. Fog was around them and gradually there was bright and beautiful sunlight shining down. The ship had sailed out of the fog. The bright sun hung high up in the sky. Qin Mu looked outside. He saw the ship floating on the river surface, and the Celestial River was currently floating in the sky. "Lin Xiao, what happened?" Qin Mu asked the one-inch man in the lantern. In that lantern the wings behind the tiny bird-headed human flapped, and he said, "Commander, there's no need to panic. This is merely a reset of space and time." "Reset of space and time?" Village chief asked carefully. "What is the meaning of that?" The one-inch human in the lantern said, "The divine art in the fog is incoherent. This kind of peculiar divine art would burst forth after a certain period of time and bring us to a fixed year. I calculated it before, and this ship would be brought to 36 different years. The current year should be." The lantern shone outwards and revealed billowing smokes, as well as fires of war. "It's the Light Emperor era now. As for which year it is, I'm not clear." The tiny human in the lantern said, "The son of Light Emperor from the Light Emperor Celestial Heavens, Emperor Sun Qi Shao, is about to board this ship." Just as his voice landed, a young general that was currently fighting flew over. He raised his hand from far away, and a mirror in his hand shone down on this ship. That young general arrived along with that light, and he looked awe-inspiring with his 3 heads and 6 arms. "Emperor Sun Qi Shao?" Qin Mu shuddered and said softly, "Wasn't Emperor Sun Qi Shao one of the faces from the black coffin which Ancestral Dragon King shattered when we first boarded the ship? That face claimed to be Crown Prince Qi Shao of Light Emperor." Village chief's face changed slightly and he muttered, "It can't be him. He was clearly swallowed up by the coffin and died from loss of blood. The one that just boarded can't be Crown Prince Qi Shao. It must be a person with a similar name. This is the Celestial River Ghost ship." The voice of that young general rang out in delight and surprise. This treasure would actually appear at this moment. Could the heavens be helping me? I've heard that this ship carries the strongest gods of the ancient celestial heavens. If they can be used by me. He waved his flag, and numerous 3-headed and 6-armed gods flew over to land on the ship. That young general cried out, "Search this ship. Find out where the feathered forest guards of the ancient times are. Your Highness, there are seals on this ship. Open them." After a moment, black coffins grew out from the deck, and black gas spread out. Waves of flustered cries came from the gods of the young general. When the black gas finally dispersed, numerous gods of the Crimson Light era and that young general had vanished. Only the black coffins remained on the deck. The black coffins slowly sank down and vanished. When they reappear once again, Crown Prince Qi Shao will die because of the black coffin being shattered. The one-inch human flapped his wings in the lantern and said, "Commander, let us go see Celestial Empress coffin. Follow me." Qin Mu and Village Chief looked each other in the eyes, and both of them were slightly muddled. Village Chief suddenly said, "General Lin Xiao, when you met Qin Mu for the first time, you said Commander has become younger again. What is the meaning of that? Have you seen him in the past? Was his age much older than he is now?" Qin Mu felt a chill down his spine, and he hurriedly looked at the tiny human in the lantern. The tiny human in the lantern remained silent. The wrinkles on Village Chief's face distorted, and his voice was slightly trembling. "Which also means this isn't the first time we have boarded this ship. We have already boarded this ship many times and even stayed for a very long time on this ship. Am I right?" The tiny human sat on the door sill of the lantern and flapped his wings. The lantern floated forward and he said, "On this ship, every time is the first time. Over here please." Dragon-rearing sovereign collapsed onto the ground and wailed, "We are done for, it's over. My lord, we are finished." Qin Mu's expression was grim. He grabbed his dragon horn and dragged him forward. They walked around a pavilion and saw that the old dragon that had fused with the building in front of the pavilion had already turned into stone. On the face of the stone dragon was a look of terror. Qin Mu raised his head and examined this stone dragon. He said with a smile, "Could this crazy old dragon be dragon-rearing sovereign?" Dragon-rearing sovereign shuddered, and his body became even limper. "Mu'er, don't scare him." Village chief had a solemn expression, and he said seriously, "I've encountered more than my fair share of strange occurrences and have been through countless trials. I won't be trapped by this ship. Don't worry, I can definitely bring you guys out, let's go." Behind the building was a hall, and the lantern brought them through the long winding corridor of the palaces. They passed by fake mountains and discussion halls and came to another hall behind the hall. The first thing that entered their line of sight was 8 huge and red dragons. The bodies of these huge dragons hung on a horizontal beam above this wide hall, and their bodies were half stretched down from above. Their bodies then coiled around bronze pillars as they stretched their claws forward to touch the ground. Their necks were raised high, but their heads were lowered forward at a floating coffin. 8 huge dragons were precisely in all 8 directions of this coffin, and seemed to be protecting this coffin. However, the bodies of these 8 dragons had already been turned into stone. It was as if they were being carved from sparkling and translucent rubies, which looked extremely gorgeous. Ancestral Dragon King and the rest had already reached here, and they walked past the 8 dragons to come to the side of the coffin. Ancestral Dragon King's divine might burst forth as he tried to open the floating coffin. However, the floating coffin was extremely heavy, and it was covered with a huge number of seals. Even a great god on the numinous sky realm like him wasn't able to open it. The feathered forest guards are one of the 2 guards among the 10 guards of celestial heavens. The left and right feathered forest, the left and right dragon marshal, the left and right divine marshal, the left and right divine stratagem, and the left and right divine awe. Among them, the feathered forest guards were personally controlled by Celestial Emperor. What is the feathered forest? The feathered wings of the empire, as flourishing as a forest. That is the feathered forest. Prince Qiuming said, "Since the feathered forest guards are the army of Celestial Emperor, the ones chosen are naturally the strongest existences in the world. Demon Dragon, how could the seals placed by them be opened up by someone like you?" Ancestral Dragon's face flushed and he sneered, saying, "Even if I can't open it, can you?" Prince Qiuming's clothes fluttered in the wind as he took a wide stride forward. He said with a smile, "The feathered forest guards are the army of my celestial heavens, from generation to generation. I've also entered the feathered forest guards to seek knowledge, so even though my cultivation is inferior to yours, opening up the seals of the Dragon Han era isn't difficult for me." His hands moved up, and his vital qi transformed into all kinds of runes. The runes marked themselves on the coffin one after another, and it was truly remarkable and exquisite. Everyone saw this and felt apprehensive. The paths, skills, and divine arts of the celestial heavens are truly immeasurable. Qin Mu's heart also sank. Prince Qiuming's attainments were extremely high, and his abilities were extraordinarily strong. The celestial heavens have been collecting all kinds of Emperor's throne techniques, and the elites they have groomed are indeed extraordinary. After a moment, beads of sweat rolled down Prince Qiuming's forehead, and he started to frown. He suddenly moved back and shook his head. Strange, it's not just the seals of the feathered forest guards on this. There are also seals I have not yet learned." Feng Chuyun sneered and said, "Bumpkin Prince of the Upper Bound who only knows how to brag, what a joke. Let me do it." She placed down the Emperor's coffin and pulled out the Mother Earth primordial sword. The wooden sword flashed and stabbed at the coffin of Celestial Empress as she tried to break the seal by force. Even though she was the maid of Mother Earth, she was also the chief of the Phoenix race, a great expert on the numinous sky realm. She had extremely strong abilities, and with the Mother Earth primordial sword, it shouldn't be difficult for her to break the seal. However, even after Feng Chuyun had stabbed dozens of times, light flowed around the coffin, and all kinds of seals appeared. They actually blocked her power and the power of the Mother Earth primordial sword. The seal around the coffin was a circular stellar system formed by countless kinds of divine arts. They absorbed the power of the Mother Earth primordial sword. Feng Chuyun frowned, and she put the sword back into her sleeves. She returned to the side of the Emperor's coffin. Prince Qiuming said with a smile, "Even though Mother Earth is strong, her foundation is still far inferior to the celestial heavens. Who else wants to try?" Qin Mu had a strange expression. It was fine if it was the other seals, as he didn't recognize many of them. However, when these seals formed together, it was the seal of Founding Master. He had seen Founding Master's galaxy seal more than once, and he had also solved them more than once. Beside the Permitha Arc, in the valley where the old dragon was suppressed, on the god execution stage of Crimson Light Abnormal Star, he had solved them before. Suddenly, he felt a pair of eyes on his body, and he looked over to see Zhahuali. Qinmu gave him a slight smile. When he had solved the Galaxy Divine Art on God Execution stage, Zhahuali and Qijui were right beside him, and they even got tricked by him. It was obvious that Zhahuali still remembered this. Only Cult Master Qin can solve these seals. Zhahuali suddenly spoke out. Why doesn't Cult Master Qin give it a try? Pairs of eyes landed on Qinmu's body, and Qinmu laughed loudly. He let go of Dragon rearing Sovereign's horn and let his head smashed onto the ground. His head bounced several times, but he was still too limp to get up. Qinmu walked to the side of Celestial Empress' coffin. He carefully examined the seal on it and suddenly burst out into laughter. This seal has been solved by someone before, so it isn't too difficult to solve it again. Solved by someone before? Everyone was astonished, and before they could come back to their senses, Qinmu moved quickly around the coffin and executed all kinds of Madras skills. Instantly, the stellar system around the coffin moved, and the stars were being solved continuously. The stars formed by all kinds of divine arts retreated to the back. Not long later, all of the stars had moved back, and they transformed into runes to mark the coffin, forming a brilliant image of a galaxy. Kacha! Celestial Empress coffin gave off a light sound. Qinmu moved back to village chief's side. I'm lucky to have met everyone's expectations. The lid of the coffin slowly floated upwards and hung above the coffin. In the coffin, multicolored sunlight rose, and the sound of Tao lingered on. It was as though a beautiful woman was singing with all kinds of unending temperament. That kind of Tao voice was from the rhythm of the great Tao, which caused people to be entranced and unable to pull themselves out. Nobody cared why Qinmu was able to open the seal. They hurriedly rushed forward and looked into the coffin. Crimson Light Son of God suddenly cried out, "What a beautiful woman!" Everyone else's throat was parched as they blushed when they saw the woman in the coffin. They were speechless. Suddenly, a half-god roared and ripped apart his shirt as he tried to jump into the coffin. To be able to be buried with such a beauty in the same coffin, I have not lived my life for naught. Qi! Luo Wushuang slashed down with his knife and killed the half-god. Whoever dares to insult the corpse of Celestial Empress shall end up like that fool. Ancestral Dragon King, get your subordinates to settle down. The knife in his hand was also trembling slightly. It was obvious he was also astonished by the beauty of the woman in the coffin, and that his Tao heart was slightly wavering. Celestial Empress? Ancestral Dragon King's laryngeal prominence moved up and down, and his gaze fell on the coffin. He asked with a hoarse voice, "There are two women in the coffin, which one is Celestial Empress?" Qinmu and Village Chief were stunned. "Two women in the coffin?" Village Chief asked with a low voice. "Moor, when you opened the coffin, did you look inside?" Qinmu shook his head and said softly, "Village Chief wanted me to stay low-key, so I immediately moved back after I opened the coffin so that I didn't become everyone's target. As for what's in the coffin, I'm not too clear. How are there two corpses in the coffin?" Both of them looked at each other in dismay. Village Chief hesitated for a moment. "Why don't we go up and take a look as well?" Qinmu nodded his head repeatedly as he couldn't suppress his curiosity. Village Chief also couldn't suppress his curiosity. He raised his hand to grab Dragon rearing Sovereign's horn and dragged him forward as well. When they arrived at the side of the coffin, Village Chief tiptoed to look in the coffin. The multicolored sunlight lit everybody's faces up, and two women could be seen lying silently inside the coffin. "How pretty, even a little prettier than Granny C," praised Village Chief. Qinmu's hands grabbed onto the sides of the coffin, and he popped his head over to look. There were indeed two remarkably beautiful women inside the coffin. However, one of them was perfect and flawless while the other was slightly less pretty. Even when he was used to Granny C's beauty, he still could feel his heart stirring. That woman placed both of her hands in front of her chest as though she was asleep. "How pretty!" Qinmu's heart stirred slightly, and he took off the willow leaf on the heart of his brows, allowing Heaven Duke, Earth Count, and the rest to see the sight in the coffin. "Heaven Duke, come look at this woman." Heaven Duke's astonished voice rang out in his mind. "Ju Wuchen? Why is she dead? The woman in the coffin is indeed Ju Wuchen." Qin Mu's heart stirred, and his consciousness asked Heaven Duke, "Is the other woman in the coffin Celestial Empress?" His gaze landed on the body of the other woman, and the body of the other woman seemed to be formed completely naturally. She was born by the great Tao of heaven and earth, so even though she wasn't as beautiful as Ju Wuchen, she was still a rare beauty. She had the bearing of a motherly model of the world, and the clothes on her body were tailored with threads refined from the most precious divine metal. She wore a phoenix crown on her head, and on the heart of her brows was a spot of cinnabar. She had a powdered face and red lips. The injuries on her body were rather severe, but to Qin Mu, her wounds weren't considered lethal. There was still a way to treat her. However, there were no such conditions in the past, so the wounds of this woman were enough to take her life. The Tao of healing didn't belong to the great Tao of heaven and earth after all. It was a great Tao that was created by the life forms after the beginning, and in the past, the Tao of healing had merely just taken off, so it wasn't enough to treat injuries like this. And the great Tao of creation was also a great Tao created by the life forms. The great Tao of creation from that era wasn't enough to help Celestial Emperor change her fate. "It is Celestial Empress." Heaven Duke borrowed his eye to examine the two female corpses in the coffin and sighed. "Celestial Empress is actually dead. This woman is sacred and extraordinary. Never would I have expected her to become a corpse as well. I always thought that among the leaders of the ancient gods, Goddess of Heavenly Een was the first to die. Never would I have expected it to be her. So who exactly is the Celestial Empress in the celestial heavens? Could it be Heaven Duke can determine she's Celestial Empress?" Qin Mu suddenly asked, "Heaven Duke, I've heard that Celestial Empress and her sister look the same. Maybe it's her sister that's in the coffin." "It's not that woman. Even though they are twin sisters, there are still differences," Heaven Duke said patiently. "The older sister is clear as ice and clean as jade, having a bearing that is sacred and can't be violated. Thus she was Celestial Empress. On the other hand, the younger sister is much more active and bizarre. The most obvious difference between both of them is the mark on the heart of their brows. The older sister has a red mark, which is extremely feminine and supple, while the younger sister has a black mark, which is extremely demonic." Qin Mu examined that spot of cinnabar on Celestial Empress' corpse, and realized it wasn't dotted with cinnabar. Looking at it in detail, there seemed to be boundless vein lines that were hidden inside, making it extremely profound and marvelous. Heaven Duke sighed. "Both sisters fighting each other to the death for Celestial Emperor. Is it worth the trouble? However, why is Ju Wuchen dead as well? This woman lured Celestial Emperor to reincarnate and assaulted him. She's truly ruthless, and her methods are extraordinary. Why would her corpse be here? Who killed her and placed her here?" Qin Mu was at a loss from his questions. What Heaven Duke was asking was also what he wanted to ask, but it was obvious that Heaven Duke didn't know the answer, which was why he was asking him. "Don't cover your eye." Heaven Duke saw Qin Mu grabbing the willow leaf and he hurriedly said, "This is interesting. Let us have a look as well." Qin Mu could only put away the willow leaf as he heard Crimson Emperor's voice sounding out. "This is Ju Wuchen? Truly a beauty. What a pity. If I were still alive, you would die miserably." Earth Count's voice rang out and he said, "Even Heaven Duke and Celestial Emperor couldn't resist the temptation. If Celestial Emperor didn't send himself to death, Heaven Duke would definitely have reincarnated and flirted with this woman, sending himself to death." "Old Buddha, has your mortal heart started stirring?" Brahma Buddha said. "Beauty will still turn into a skeleton. To me, it's nothing more than that. The crux is that a god won't die from old age, so there is only beauty and no skeleton." Heaven Duke said, "Old Buddha, your dharma still has flaws. Be careful of being at a disadvantage." "Great Sun Sovereign, what do you know about this woman?" Great Sun Sovereign grumbled. "What can I know? Everything that I know has already been dug out by you guys. Besides, Ju Wuchen died after me, and I wouldn't have dared to have any thoughts about her. Truly a beauty, to be able to share the same room with such a person. Strange, there's no obvious wound on her body. Crimson Light Son of God discovered something and suddenly spoke. Everyone hurriedly examined her in detail, and the Ju Wuchen in the coffin indeed had no wound. She laid there quietly, and it was as if she was asleep. Her fair cheeks had some rosy color, but she wasn't breathing. Could someone have used a Yudu spell to seize her soul by force? Everyone stood in front of the coffin and couldn't bear to disperse. They had completely forgotten that their goal was to investigate the real and fake Celestial Empress and not the woman in the coffin. Feng Chuyun suddenly sneered and said, "Men are all no good. How dare you call yourselves heroes? It's just a woman and even a corpse, yet you stinky men are head over heels for her, how laughable." Qin Mu said in delight, "Sister Chuyun, I'm not head over heels for her, I'm still pretty sober." "Village Chief, you are too, am I right?" Village Chief's face blushed slightly, and he chuckled. "I'm long used to Granny C's beauty, so I'm naturally in control." Feng Chuyun snorted and looked at Prince Cho Ming. "Bumpkin Prince of the Upper Bound, we are here to see if this is Celestial Empress coffin and if it's really her that's inside. Now that you have taken a look, do you have an answer?" Prince Cho Ming pulled back his gaze and he said solemnly, "It's indeed Celestial Empress that is in the coffin." Everyone was astonished, and that included Luo Wushuang. Feng Chuyun said, "So who is the Celestial Empress in the celestial heavens?" Prince Cho Ming shook his head and said, "I don't know. I suddenly don't want to know. The more you know, the faster you will die. I don't want to die. I just want to leave this ghost ship. Everyone can leave now." The gaze of every man was placed on Ju Wuchen, who was in the coffin. No one moved. The ghost ship was no longer important. All of them wanted to stay here to be with this woman in the coffin. Village Chief sighed and pulled back his gaze. He pulled Qin Mu's hand and slowly moved back. "We aren't interested in the ghost ship, nor are we interested in the woman in the coffin. We will make a move first." He kicked Dragon Rearing Sovereign, and Dragon Rearing Sovereign barely managed to stand up. He moved out with them. Right at this moment, light flashed from somewhere, and everyone saw white light in front of their eyes. They couldn't see anything. Qin Mu and Village Chief's heart squeezed. This ghost ship is going to reset time and space again. Waves of dragon roars came from the hall, and terrifying auras burst forth. Qin Mu immediately sensed the 8 stone dragons guarding the coffin starting to revive, so he felt a chill down his back. He hurriedly ran out of the hall. Dragon roars reverberated in the hall and terrifying pulses spread out. There was the light of knives, the shadow of swords, and even the impact of the Emperor's awe. Even though the hall was very huge, it also couldn't take the impact of the divine arts from so many experts. Furthermore, there was even an Emperor's corpse here, as well as divine weapons on Emperor's throne realm. "Quickly leave this place, it's going to reset!" The tiny human in the lantern cried out flusteredly. Village Chief immediately pulled out his sword, and the sword light flashed. In terms of sword skills, Qin Mu had already surpassed him, but in terms of sword Dao, he was still the #1 man in Eternal Peace. Even Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was far inferior. On the Divine Bridge realm, he had already founded the 9 forms of sword picture. One move of sword Dao was equivalent to 1 heaven, so at that time, he was already a great expert on the 9 heavens of sword Dao. Entering the Dao was difficult no matter which method was used. However, in order to advance another step, it was more than difficult. Even in existence like Heavenly Teacher Z, she had only reached 13 heavens in Sword Dao. However, Heavenly Teacher Z, she was on the numinous sky realm, and the 13 heavens of Sword Dao was her limit. That was the Sword Dao she had opened up on the numinous sky realm. Village Chief was different. He was trapped on the Divine Bridge realm back then and couldn't find a technique that could surpass the Divine Bridge realm, so he couldn't cultivate to an even higher realm. He had relied completely on his talent and hard work to create the 9 forms of sword picture. The 9 forms of sword picture corresponded to the realm of a true god. This also meant that on the Divine Bridge realm, the sword Dao he comprehended had already reached the realm of a true god. Afterward, when Qin Mu spread out techniques like the secrets of Magpie Bridge to patch the Divine Bridge, using between life and death to connect to Fengdu, and using Mutual Shift Bridge to connect to Supreme Emperor Heaven, more and more god techniques and devil techniques emerged. Even techniques on Emperor's throne realm were spread out, and Village Chief's horizons rose drastically. When Qin Mu had been traveling around during this period of time, Village Chief hadn't been slacking off. He had memorized the techniques of the Sword Dao in the Jade Brightness Palace by heart, and his Sword Dao had another astonishing breakthrough. With a sword in hand, Village Chief broke through all kinds of divine arts and brought Qin Mu and dragon-rearing sovereign to break out. There was also light in front, so he couldn't see anything. He could only rely on his own feelings to advance forward, and suddenly, his sword touched a divine knife and gave off a loud clank. That divine knife flowed swiftly like mercury, and there were no holes that it couldn't pass through. Village Chief executed his sword skill to block the divine knife, and he said solemnly, "Divine knife Luo? Eternal peace sword god?" The divine knife flowed swiftly. The knife Dao clashed violently with the sword Dao, and Village Chief was stunned when he swung his sword to block. The power from the knife wasn't strong, and it wasn't much different from his magic power. Divine knife Luo is suppressing his realm to fight with me? He wants to see my sword Dao. Suddenly, his knife light was pulled back, and Luo Wushuang left into the distance. In the light, a divine dragon suddenly passed through the knife light and sword shadow, throwing Village Chief and Qin Mu into midair. It wasn't known if it was a divine dragon from Dragon Count Country, or if it was Ancestral Dragon King. Even more people rushed out from the hall, and a huge bang rang out as the hall collapsed. Blazing flames burst out in the light, and it was Feng Choyun who had opened up the Emperor's coffin. The Emperor's corpse jumped out and roared furiously, shattering the entire hall. "Feng Choyun, you are crazy." Crimson Light Son of God transformed into a beam of light to pass by the side of Qin Mu and the rest. Right at this moment, the light suddenly faded away, and they regained their sight. Village Chief protected Qin Mu and dragon-rearing sovereign while he scattered sword light from his hands to slice all kinds of divine arts. He landed gently on the ground and gave a grunt. Blood leaked out from the corner of his mouth. Qin Mu immediately said, "Village Chief, you are injured?" "I'm fine," Village Chief said faintly. "I just got rubbed against by the divine dragon, so I still won't die." Luo Wushuang's knife Dao is indeed very powerful. His knife Dao has already reached 13 heavens. However, seeing how I've just entered the Dao, my sword Dao is not inferior. Qin Mu quickly executed creation divine arts to treat his injuries. Dragon-rearing sovereign said with a muddled head. "My lord, wasn't the hall earlier destroyed?" Qin Mu was stunned and turned back to take a look. He saw the hall standing upright there properly, and it hadn't collapsed. It looked the same as it did, and there was no place that had been damaged. The 8 dragons were still coiled around in the hall, and protecting the coffin of Celestial Empress. Beside the coffin was another coffin, and it was the Emperor's stone coffin that Feng Chuyun had brought over. The stone coffin was half submerged in the ground, and the other half was outside. That Emperor's corpse was actually fused with the ground and the stone coffin. The green face of the zombie was currently stuck on the lid of the coffin, and his gray-white eyes were rolling around. Numerous half-gods that were brought here by Ancestral Dragon King had half of their bodies stuck to the wall. Some grew on pillars and revealed their butts outside, while some were sunk into the ground as though faces were growing on the ground. They were still alive. However, when the light had burst forth earlier, it was as if they were reconstructed. However, the reconstruction seemed to be wrong and caused them to be fused as one with this hall. This broken ship is too peculiar. Qin Mu, dragon-rearing sovereign, and Village Chief had their hair standing on end. This kind of situation was unheard of. For living organisms to actually be growing together with the main hall was simply a deliberate exaggeration to scare people, yet it had appeared right in front of their eyes. Different organisms actually growing together as one was possible, but that was living organisms growing together with living organisms. However, what was before them was living organisms that were growing together with dead objects. The most terrifying part was that even such a strong existence as the Emperor's corpse didn't manage to escape. It had transformed into a part of the main hall. Village Chief took a step first to return to the main hall and said softly, "Let's go and take a look. Moor, be careful. If there's danger, just activate your teleportation divine art immediately. Don't care about us and just escape by yourself." Qin Mu shook his head and said, "My teleportation divine art is fast enough. I can bring you guys and we can leave together." Village Chief shook his head. He knew that he couldn't persuade him. When they returned to the main hall, the hall was clear and orderly. Everything was how it was before, except for those people that were growing with the main hall. Feng Qiuyun has escaped. Qin Mu looked around and couldn't find Feng Qiuyun. Village chief stared at the mural in the main hall and shook his head. She didn't manage to escape. Look over here. Qin Mu looked at the mural, and on the mural was the scene of the feathered forest guards quelling the rebellion. Gods were fighting and the scene was desperate. Every soldier from the feathered forest guards was brave and skilled in battle, possessing extraordinary abilities. The painting Dao had just started in the Dragon Han celestial heavens, so the painting techniques weren't exquisite. It couldn't be compared to the painting Dao of Founding Emperor and Eternal Peace. The feathered forest guards were painted rather flatly on the surface, whereas Def could achieve a world inside the painting and a world outside the painting. The painting Dao was also a great Dao after the beginning. Heavenly Saint Cult had 360 professions and 360 halls. After Qin Mu had become cult master, he had added another school hall, and the fact was that most of the professions in the Heavenly Saint Cult could be treated as great Dao after the beginning of the world. They weren't part of the great Dao before the beginning, and they were great Dao that were created by the life forms after the beginning. Yet, in this painting that Qin Mu found to be crude, there was a vividly drawn phoenix that was flapping her wings. That phoenix was out of place when compared to the plainer paintings of the feathered forest guards. That was Feng Qiuyun, and she had also been hit by the divine art when she was escaping. Time and space must have reset just as she reached the borders of the main hall, trapping her inside the painting. Where is the Mother Earth primordial sword? Qin Mu blinked his eyes and scanned around with his gaze. Feng Qiuyun had already revealed her true form by transforming into a phoenix, and the sword was currently in her claws. This sword was forged by Mother Earth and was extremely powerful. The sword gave off a golden glow, and the light swirled non-stop. It actually countered the rest of time and space, so there was a possibility it could even jump out of the painting. Qin Mu tried to see if he could grab the sword, but he couldn't, so he could only sigh in pity. Feng Qiuyun's eyeballs could still move, so she stared at him furiously. Qin Mu ignored her and moved to the side of the emperor's coffin. In the coffin was the corpse of a celestial emperor from North High Emperor. He had already turned stiff and was currently snarling with all his might. He was trying to break free of the assimilation, but he couldn't jump out. Mu'er, this emperor's corpse still has emperor's awe, so don't get too close. Village chief's voice rang out, and Qin Mu also felt it was an abnormally terrifying emperor's awe. This emperor's corpse was extremely powerful, and had the momentum of breaking out of the assimilation. This astonished him. The three of them surveyed their surroundings. The 8 divine dragons were petrified once again, and they continued to guard Celestial Empress' coffin. However, her coffin had already closed once more. Other than them and those half-gods and gods that were sealed, there was nobody else left. Crimson Light Son of God, Ancestral Dragon King, Divine Knife Lua Wushuang, Prince Qiu Ming, and the rest were no longer here. They must have escaped. Village chief immediately made a decision. Mu'er, Feng Qiuyun and the emperor's corpse will break free sooner or later, and they will definitely lay their hands on us. This ghost ship is huge, so we should leave here immediately and investigate other places. Let us see if we can find a way to leave the ship. Qin Mu shook his head and walked towards the coffin. I want to take a look at Celestial Empress and Zhu Wuchen again. Village chief frowned, but he suddenly felt gratified. Mu'er has grown up. He likes to look at beautiful women now. The pig that we raised has also learned to dig up white cabbages now. Granny and the rest have always been worried that this brat is dense, and now he is finally enlightened. Qin Mu cast his spell and opened up the coffin again. In the coffin, Celestial Empress and Zhu Wuchen laid side by side. Qin Mu took in a deep breath and executed the Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique. The Gate of Heaven influence suddenly appeared behind him. Mu'er, what are you doing? Village chief asked cautiously, summoning the souls of Celestial Empress and Zhu Wuchen to ask them clearly. Qin Mu immediately cast his spell, and he said solemnly, Village chief, don't worry, I'm not reviving them, I'm just summoning their souls for questioning. After I interrogate them, I will return them back and not leave them here. Village chief let out a sigh of relief and said, That's good then. However, it's fine if you send Celestial Empress soul back, but it's also fine if Zhu Wuchen's soul remains here. Qin Mu was stunned and took a glance at him. Village chief's face turned slightly red, and he hurriedly said, I feel that this girl is too pitiful. If you think that sending them off is good, then you can just send them off. I'm starting to get old and you are frequently not home. Sometimes I feel that I'm rather lonely and that I need a partner. Qin Mu ignored him and executed Soul Guide. He chanted Yudu Devil language, and it would sometimes jump to Xuandu God language. He mixed all kinds of languages, and the power of the divine art grew stronger and stronger. After a moment, Qin Mu suddenly stopped. Weird. He turned around to walk to and fro around the coffin and muttered to himself, "No soul, how is that possible? It's impossible for her to have no soul." Even celestial venerable Yu, whose soul had been scattered for 1,000,000 years, could also be gathered back. This woman definitely has a soul. Village chief asked. "Moor, what's wrong?" "Zhu Wuchen has no soul," Qin Mu said puzzledly. "With Soul Guide, no matter which universe her soul landed in, she wouldn't be able to escape from my divine art. However, when I executed my divine art earlier, I couldn't sense her soul at all, not even a particle. This body of hers is an empty shell." "What you mean is?" Village chief had a weird expression. Zhu Wuchen could still be alive? She just abandoned her body and changed her face to live in this world. No, even if she changed her body, she can't change her soul. What my soul guide is guiding is her soul. So even if she changed her face, her soul would still be summoned by my divine art. Even if I can't summon it, I should still sense the existence of her soul. Qin Mu had an even weirder face, and he suddenly said with conviction, "Zhu Wuchen, this woman is man-made." Village chief jumped in shock and cried out, "Such beauty is man-made?" Qin Mu stopped in his footsteps and looked at this woman, who was such a beautiful and alluring woman that she couldn't have been made. It requires extremely high attainments in creation in order to create such a woman. However, creation divine arts cannot create a brand new soul, so Zhu Wuchen has no soul. Village chief looked at the woman in the coffin, and a boulder in his heart dropped. That woman was affecting his Dao heart earlier, but when he looked at her now, he wasn't affected anymore. "Moor, what you mean is that someone created such a beauty and lured Celestial Emperor down to the lower bound before getting rid of him?" Village chief said. "How strong is Celestial Emperor? Could he not have seen that this beauty had no soul?" Qin Mu pondered and said, "In that case, someone had to project their primordial spirit out and enter Zhu Wuchen's body to become Zhu Wuchen." Village chief gave it some thought and said, "Furthermore, this person had to know Celestial Emperor very well and adapt to his taste. This person also had to let Celestial Emperor not realize who the actual person was. Therefore, the one hidden in Zhu Wuchen's body must have been someone besides Celestial Emperor." Both of them looked at each other. Village chief suddenly said, "Moor, try summoning Celestial Empress soul. I suddenly have a theory." Qin Mu instantly understood what his theory was, but he didn't say it out loud. Instead, he did as he said and executed Soul Guide again, trying to summon Celestial Empress soul. "If my guess is correct, you will definitely be in danger if you summon Celestial Empress soul. Let me protect you." Village chief pulled out his sword and closed his eyes. His aura burst forth, and the sword in his hand shone brighter and brighter. The sword in his hand was like an awakened dragon that could soar out any time. He executed his sword Dao to the limits. Qin Mu started chanting Yudu Devil language, and the gate of heaven influence opened up behind him with thick devil qi. After a moment, he finally sensed Celestial Empress soul. It was a complete soul. Celestial Empress soul had no damage, and her 3 souls were all intact. She was incomparably powerful, and Qin Mu felt as though she was a towering god that was standing above the 9 heavens. Right when Qin Mu sensed Celestial Empress also sensed him. Her phoenix eye opened up and looked at him through boundless space. Qin Mu's eyes suddenly turned black, as though he had fallen into an immeasurably deep abyss. His soul warped and felt as if it was going to leave his body and fall eternally. Village chief's sword soared up, and sword light shone to slash at the void. The snow-bright sword cut the connection between Qin Mu and Celestial Empress in that split second, and after the sword light landed, Village chief's body trembled and blood gushed out from his eyes, ears, mouth and nose. Sword light flashed in front of Qin Mi's eyes, and his primordial spirit immediately returned back to his corporeal body. His body was covered in sweat, and his hands were trembling. Alive! Celestial Empress is still alive." He was like a drowning person who had floated out of the water as he gasped for air. His voice was hoarse and he said, "Celestial Empress is still not dead." Village chief's hand that was holding the divine sword was still trembling. The divine sword in his hand trembled, and he suddenly heard a pop as the divine sword in his hand exploded and turned into powder. Village chief loosened his palm, and the handle turned into powder to slide down his palm. Old and experienced, old and experienced. Village chief vomited out a mouthful of fresh blood, and his aura withered. His body turned limp and he collapsed into a sitting position. He chuckled and said, "This Celestial Empress is truly old and experienced. Moore, when you left the village, I told you about the treacherous martial world. Now you see what I mean, right?" Qin Mu immediately treated his injuries, and he said solemnly, "Moore understands." Dragon-rearing sovereign was confused and still hadn't come to any realization. He hurriedly asked, "Isn't Celestial Empress dead? Why is she still alive? How is she old and experienced?" Village chief and Qin Mu didn't answer him. In Qin Wordland, Heaven Duke, Earth Count, Crimson Emperor, and Brahma Buddha were all dumbfounded and speechless. The big-headed baby, Qin Fengqing, suddenly pounced over like a cat and shattered lava Earth Count to steal the slaughter cauldron. Pieces of lava rock gradually recovered, and Earth Count's corporeal body returned back to normal. However, he didn't seize back the slaughter cauldron and remained in a daze. Truly old and experienced. He let out a sigh and said, "Truly old and experienced. It turns out that Celestial Empress is Ju Wuchen." Crimson Emperor, Brahma Buddha, and Heaven Duke were still speechless. The aura was terrifyingly solemn. Great Sun Sovereign pulled his head back, though he would examine everyone from time to time. He thought to himself, "I feel like the things I know are increasing. I was shot in the back by an arrow when I was alive because I knew too much. Now that I know even more, will I be eliminated again?" Celestial Empress is Ju Wuchen. Ju Wuchen is Celestial Empress, what a great scheme. Old Buddha sighed and said righteously, "Let me sort out the cause and effect of this incident." Celestial Empress returned to her hometown and came to the ruins of End, where Dragon Count country rebelled. Celestial Empress was assaulted. The feathered forest guards came to rescue her and investigate the incident where Celestial Empress was assaulted. The feathered forest guards quelled the rebellion, and then Celestial Empress was attacked a second time, in which she faked her death to escape. The feathered forest guards time traveled. Ju Wuchen was born, and Celestial Empress entered Ju Wuchen's body to seduce Celestial Emperor. Celestial Emperor reincarnated, and so Celestial Venerable Yun, Celestial Venerable Hao, and Ju Wuchen assassinated him. The two Celestial Venerables then rushed to the celestial heavens to seize Celestial Emperor's corporeal body, while Celestial Empress abandoned Ju Wuchen's corporeal body to bury this body with her true body, placing them on the ship where the feathered forest guards had time traveled. This is my current guess of the truth. Heaven Duke, Earth Count, Crimson Emperor, Sun Sovereign, is there anything you guys want to add? Everyone shook their heads. Old Buddha said calmly, "Now here comes the problem. Celestial Empress must have determined the plan to kill Celestial Emperor before heading to the ruins of End. So why did Dragon Count country rebel? Why did they rebel right as she returned to the ruins of End? It was an utterly dumb move of Dragon Count country to take Celestial Empress as a hostage to threaten Celestial Emperor, as it was easy for Celestial Emperor to wipe out Dragon Count country. In that case, was Dragon Count a pawn of Celestial Empress? This is one. Secondly, Celestial Empress once came onto this ghost ship to bury Ju Wuchen and put her body together with her own corporeal body. So how did she leave this ghost ship? If she didn't come personally and sent someone else instead, is this person still on the ship? Thirdly, if both the corporeal bodies of Celestial Empress and Ju Wuchen are here, where would she go without these two bodies? And who is that Celestial Empress in the celestial heavens? He voiced out his suspicions and everyone frowned. Old Buddha had asked important questions, but no one could solve his doubts. Heaven Duke said to Earth Count, "It's interesting to hide in the heart of his brows, right? We can see and listen to many things we didn't know in the past." Earth Count nodded. "However, knowing so much also makes me tremble with fear." Old Buddha stretched his back, and his body gradually rose upwards. I shall take a nap in the sky first, take care. Crimson Emperor instantly sensed something bad, and he hurriedly turned his head back only to see the big-headed baby, Qin Fengqing, looking at them maliciously while dragging his slaughter cauldron. The devil nature in the slaughter cauldron became fiercer and fiercer. Faces without any thickness appeared in the devil chi, and swirled around the big-headed baby. Ah Cho, they called out at Qin Fengqing. Old Buddha, come down. Heaven Duke said loudly. We can still suppress this chubby kid if we work together. Brahma Buddha yawned and he laid down while saying leisurely, we can't beat him now. I shall take a nap first, good luck to you. On the outside, Qin Mu's gaze twinkled. What village chief had thought was also what he had thought. Zhu Wuchen was Celestial Empress. As the Empress of Celestial Emperor, she knew Celestial Emperor's nature well, even more than Celestial Emperor himself did. Only then was she able to lay out this trap for Celestial Emperor. Since the Heaven Alliance's Celestial Venerable Yun participated, what about Celestial Venerable Ling? Qin Mu was still in a daze. Zhu Wuchen's beauty was unmatched, and in order to create such a body, one would probably need to have extraordinary comprehension in the art of creation. The only one in the Dragon Han era to possess such a profound art of creation was probably Celestial Venerable Ling. Furthermore, the time travel incident of the Feathered Forest Guards was also because they had encountered Celestial Venerable Ling casting her spell during their journey, turning them into a ghost ship that could travel through time. This was also the reason why the Feathered Forest Guards didn't manage to bring Celestial Empress' corporeal body back. The evidence of this ship had just completely vanished. Celestial Venerable Ling's appearance on the Celestial River was simply too much of a coincidence, so he couldn't help connecting the dots. Maybe Celestial Venerable Ling imparted her divine art to Celestial Venerable Yun. After all, he is still the leader of Heaven Alliance. He consoled himself and said, maybe things aren't as bad as I've imagined them to be. Village Chief's injuries were slightly better, and he forced himself to get up. When you summoned the soul, Celestial Empress should have sensed you, so she can most likely find you. We can't stay here for long. He frowned once again. Now that they were trapped on this ghost ship, there was no way for them to leave. Village Chief, don't worry. Celestial Empress can't find her way here. Qin Mu took out some spirit pills and started to refine spirit pills on the spot to treat his injuries. He said with a smile, Celestial Empress has remarkable abilities, but the Feathered Forest ghost ship can time travel. When she finds her way here, this ship will be in some other year already. Village Chief was stunned and he relaxed. This ship is so peculiar and filled with dangers. How are we supposed to leave here? Village Chief doesn't have to worry. Qin Mu finished refining his spirit pills and let him consume them to catalyze the medicinal energy. It isn't impossible to solve the Feathered Forest ghost ship. This ship must be located in a strange divine art, and this divine art is most likely a divine art that I created with Celestial Venerable Ling when I was Celestial Venerable Mu. However, it was only in the fledgling stage then. I need to find more clues in order to solve this divine art. Village Chief said with a smile, in our village, the one who is the most knowledgeable now is you. You have not failed our teachings. Since it's a divine art that you created with that Celestial Venerable Ling or something, it shouldn't be too difficult. Wait a minute, what did you just say? Celestial Venerable Mu? What Celestial Venerable Mu? Qin Mu smiled, and he told Village Chief about how he had traveled back in time with Founding Emperor to the ancient Dragon Han era. Village Chief's mind was blown, and he had an empty gaze. He couldn't come back to his senses even after a long time. Suddenly, this old man tried to pull out his sword, but he had completely forgotten that his sword had already shattered. Qin Mu asked curiously, what is Village Chief doing? Killing dragon-rearing sovereign. Village Chief overflowed with killing intent and said, this incident is of utmost importance, and now that dragon-rearing sovereign knows, we naturally have to silence him. Dragon-rearing sovereign's face turned ashen. Qin Mu said with a smile, dragon-rearing sovereign has also worked hard, so how can we kill him just because he knows a little secret of mine? Village Chief, don't worry. He has already made a pact of big and little earth counts with me, so he won't dare to turn against me. Dragon-rearing sovereign hurriedly nodded his head. Village Chief could only leave it at that, and he said, do you have any confidence in solving this peculiar divine art? Qin stretched his body and walked out. Someone has solved this divine art from celestial venerable Ling before, and that is the 4 deities. Village chief came to a realization and followed after him. That's right, the 4 deities have been on this ship. Their seals are all around the deck to seal those black coffins, which means that vermilion bird, black tortoise, green dragon, and white tiger have all been here. They solved the divine art here and left this place. Qin nodded his head and said, "At this moment, celestial venerable Ling's divine art shouldn't be perfect, and as a result, the substance of this ship isn't stable. Every time this ghost ship time travels, the substance is reconstructed. Since there's a flaw which could be discovered by the 4 deities, I can find it too." They left the main hall, and the lantern flew up and down around them. The light from the lantern shone brightly in all directions. Miserable cries from that old dragon in the distance could be heard once again. Heaven and earth changes, the unchanging constant of 36 people. The unchanging constant 36, what's the meaning? Qin frowned slightly. Is that old dragon count or dragon rearing sovereign? Or maybe it's ancestral dragon king who would go crazy in the future. He had a bad feeling in his heart. If it was dragon rearing sovereign or ancestral dragon king, would there be the 2 of them as well? There must be more clues on the ship. He suddenly remembered something and hurriedly stopped the lantern. "Lin Xiao, where are the rest of the feathered forest guards? Why is there only you on this ship? Where have the rest gone?" The tiny bird-headed human sitting on the door sill of the lantern said, "Has Commander forgotten? Please follow me." He flapped his wings and the lanterns flew forward. Qin quickly followed up, and he was getting a little excited. "I have the commander's seal of the feathered forest guards, and they only recognize the seal and not the person. If I can gather the strongest army of the Dragon Han celestial heavens to assist me, I can get rid of everyone else on the ship and borrow their power to solve celestial venerable Ling's divine art." The ship was extremely huge. In front were the buildings and halls, while behind was the field where soldiers trained. The field was extremely wide and flat, which was enough to hold thousands of gods to train their battle formations. When Qin arrived there, he sensed something was wrong. He could clearly sense hundreds to thousands of abnormally strong auras, but he couldn't see anyone. Village chief and dragon-rearing sovereign also frowned. They had also sensed it, the auras of thousands of gods. Every aura was incomparably terrifying. Yet when they looked around, they couldn't see any gods. "Commander, you guys turn around," said the tiny human in the lantern. Qin and the rest turned around according to his words. The tiny human in the lantern said, "Slowly turn back." Qin and the rest slowly turned back, and from the corner of their eyes, they could see majestic gods standing on the training field. Yet when their gazes touched the gods, those terrifying gods instantly disintegrated and turned into nothing. Qin quickly turned around, and he could vaguely see thousands of gods standing upright on the training field. They were majestic and formidable. Yet these gods had crumbled in the next instant and vanished. Qin turned around once more to sense those gods, but when they turned back the next instant, he could only see the apparitions of those gods disintegrating. When the fog attacked, their corporeal bodies and primordial spirits were broken down, and they were turned into the state where they can't be seen. As long as one observes them, they would disintegrate and vanish. The tiny human had a sorrowful expression and he said, "No vision can touch them and they can't be touched either. I'm the only lucky one. I didn't get shrouded by the divine art in the fog. Back then, old commander extinguished the sun in the lantern, and so I escaped this fate." Qin was slightly in a daze, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. This ghost ship will travel through time and space 36 times, and 36 times is a cycle? The tiny human in the lantern nodded his head. More cold sweat broke out on Qin forehead. "In that case, the first time travel will return us to the time when the fog burst out?" The tiny human nodded his head again. Qin voice trembled slightly. "Which also means that we will get hit by that divine art and turn into the same state as the feathered forest guards, becoming a substance that can't be seen?" The tiny human shook his head. "Commander survived, and you even lived for a very long time on this ship until your death. I survived and lived on this ship for a very long time, but I still died from old age?" Qin was dejected. He had a strong sense of defeat. He didn't believe the words of the tiny human in the lantern originally, but after the series of unpredictable incidents that had happened since he stepped onto the ship, he was left with no choice but to believe in his words. Didn't that mean that no matter how hard he tried, he would be unable to escape the predestined fate of dying on the ship? No matter how much he struggled, he just couldn't escape from the ship. No matter how hard he tried to deduce, he would be unable to solve Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art, not even by the time he died. Dragon-rearing sovereign's heart was collapsing, and he turned limp on the ground. Tears filled his eyes and he muttered, "How are we going to leave this d***m in place? Heaven and earth changes, the unchanging constant. What is the meaning of the unchanging constant of 36 people?" He suddenly felt a chill down his spine, and he sank into great fear. Isn't that what the crazy old dragon is mumbling? Why did I repeat his words? Could I really be him? Qin Mu took a glance at him and frowned. He forced a smile and said, "So how many times have we boarded this ship? Why don't we have any memory of boarding this ship previously?" The tiny human in the lantern said, "This ship will reset the time and space 36 times in a cycle. We will appear in different years, and after 36 resets we will return to the starting point, which is the instant the fog burst forth. The people who boarded the ship in this period will not have their memory, but they will board the ship over and over again, dying over and over again before boarding the ship once more." Village Chief suddenly said, "In that case, how did you manage to retain your memory of the cycle?" The tiny human said, "I am also not clear." Qin Mu's heart stirred. That old dragon howling with grief seems to have his memory of the cycle as well. However, he seems to have gone crazy. What's going on with him? Who is he? The tiny human in the lantern said, "He is Dragon Count. Like me, he didn't fade into the void when the fog burst forth." Dragon-rearing sovereign let out a sigh of relief when he heard his words. "So it isn't me." Village Chief suddenly thought of the crux. On this ship, other than you and Dragon Count, who else didn't fade into the void? The tiny human was slightly stunned, but he didn't answer. Village Chief narrowed his eyes and glanced at Qin Mu. Qin Mu also narrowed his eyes. The sword pellet in his Taotai sack secretly flew out, and the carefree sword flew out from the sword pellet. The handle of the sword faced Village Chief. Vital Qi poured out from the tip of Village Chief's fingers and coiled around the handle of the carefree sword. He said with a smile, "Heaven and earth changes, the unchanging constant of 36 people. The unchanging constant will not change along with the reset of time and space. This ship will go through a cycle after 36 resets, and the unchanging constant of 36 people means that 36 people will not be reset, they will not fade into the void." Qin Mu said, "According to this deduction, every time the ghost ship time travels, one person will survive. The first time when the fog burst forth, Dragon Count survived. Dragon Count was then the first observer, but he couldn't accept what he was seeing, so he became crazy. Every time he meets someone, he tells others about the unchanging constant of 36 people. The unchanging constant isn't just a number, it means that 36 people won't be changed by the reset. Since Dragon Count survived during the first reset, how did you manage to survive?" Village Chief held the sword in his hand and he said faintly, "The ghost ship stops in 36 different years, and every year there will be different people boarding the ship, but only one person will survive." "Lin Xiao, when did you board this ship?" Qin Mu said, "When we boarded this ship, you took the initiative to come over when you saw me take out the commander's seal. You sat in the lantern and easily gained our trust so that we wouldn't suspect you. We were clueless about this ship and needed you to guide us. Because of that, we would obviously trust you without any question, and that would be the simplest and most effective method. What's so-called darkness under the lamp? The darkness under the lamp can bluff many people, but you can't bluff the old and experienced." Village Chief held the carefree sword behind his back, and the other hand clutched a sword technique in front of his chest. It should be a sword in front and the sword technique behind so that the sword technique couldn't be seen, making the sword skill even more mysterious. However, he did the opposite. Countless sword lights flowed around him, and sword picture took shape to shroud the surroundings. Even the tiny human in the lantern was shrouded in the sword picture. Qin Mu had never seen this kind of sword skill before. Village Chief had imparted the 9 forms of sword picture to him before, But his current sword skill should be a new sword picture that village chief had created after becoming a god. His sword Dao had reached an all-new height. And we are the old and experienced, Qinmu said with a smile. We, the disabled elderly village, never want to hurt anyone. But when we interact with others, we always keep an eye out. In that case, Lin Xiao, are you the one who brought Zhu Wuchen on the ship? The tiny human stood up from the door sill. He looked at the flowing sword light outside before pulling back his gaze. He stared at the sword technique in front of village chief. Why does Commander say so? He asked softly. After Celestial Emperor died, Celestial Empress had to get rid of Zhu Wuchen, so that whatever she had done wasn't revealed. However, the corporeal body of Zhu Wuchen was still of use to her, so she needed to preserve it for times of emergency. Since she had to get rid of Zhu Wuchen and her body, and yet preserve them at the same time, the best place was this ghost ship. Qinmu said with a smile. She would be a big figure at that point, so it wasn't good for her to do this kind of thing herself. Thus, she needed a confidant, a person she trusted to do this for her. This person brought Zhu Wuchen's corporeal body onto the ghost ship and opened up Celestial Empress' coffin to put Zhu Wuchen inside. Yet this person couldn't leave the ship and is definitely still on the ship. To protect this secret, they need to ensure that everyone who comes onto this ship can't leave. Village chief said. They must be the most active person on the ship. When new people board the ship, they would be the first to jump out and send them to their deaths. Or else, they would make them unable to leave the ship and remain here to accompany them. The first one to jump out was you. You are the one who found us according to the commander's seal, said Qinmu. The tiny human in the lantern sighed. Why would such a clever person have such a dumb mount? This dumb dragon is the reason I underestimated you guys. You guys are dumb as well, he said coldly. You should have attacked me when you suspected me instead of saying it out loud. If you guys ambushed me, you might have had a chance at survival, but now you can only die. Right at this moment, light burst forth once more. In front of Qinmu's eyes was white light, and he couldn't see anything. The ghost ship had reset the time and space again. You guys are right, I was the one who brought Zhu Wuchen onto this ship and entombed her with Celestial Empress. I also opened up Celestial Empress' coffin. What you didn't know is that the people that enter this ship experience reset after reset, and that their bodies and primordial spirits will gradually fade into the void. In the light, village chief's sword picture burst forth. And this was the sword Dao that village chief had comprehended after he had become a god. As the old sword god of Eternal Peace Empire, he had walked even further on the sword Dao. He was also the first true god on the sword Dao in Eternal Peace Empire. His sword skills were inferior to Qinmu, but in terms of power on the sword Dao, even Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was inferior to him. The power of the sword Dao burst forth, and even in the light, the apparition formed by the 12th form of sword picture could still be seen clearly. That was a tourmaline of the firmament, and the sword picture was like a madra, the madra was like the sky, and the sword light was like a net of the heavenly law. With horizontal and vertical heavenly might, they thrust and weaved through one another. In the lantern, the small sun suddenly burst forth, and the firepower of the sun scattered recklessly to melt the sword light. Light shone down to burn a huge hole in the sword picture. Eternal Peace Sword God. It isn't that I'm no match for you. In fact, my power is something you can't imagine. The lantern flew quickly into the distance, and the tiny human's voice came from far away. However, in this place, the stronger you are, the faster you will fade into the void. When I delivered Zhu Wuchen here, I discovered this, so I immediately killed my companions and severed my own cultivation. The sun in my lantern was transformed from my cultivation that was severed away. If you want to live on, you need to do what I did and kill the other people that boarded the ship with you while also severing your own cultivation. Otherwise, you will fade into the void as well. The light vanished. Village chief pulled the sword back and handed the sword handle to Qinmu. His flapping clothes calmed down. Qinmu didn't take the sword and just said solemnly, Village chief, what this Lin Xiao said probably isn't real. He might be lying to us to trick us into fighting the other strong practitioners to the death. It should be right. Village chief raised his hands and looked at his skin. His corporeal body had become a little fainter. Qinmu's heart trembled. Village chief said with a sigh, the stronger the abilities, the faster one will fade into the void. In that case, the first one to fade into the void will be that emperor's corpse that Feng Chuyun carried over, followed by ancestral Dragon King, Feng Chuyun, Crimson Light Son of God, Luo Wushuang, and the few followers of Prince Chou Ming. It will then be Dragon-rearing Sovereign and me. This ship and Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art should already be alive. It would, of course, weaken the strong practitioners that pose the greatest threat. The greater the threat, the faster one will fade into the void. If we return to the main hall where Celestial Empress coffin is, we will have our answer. Qin Mu's heart was heavy as the three of them returned to the main hall. 8 dragons were still surrounding Celestial Empress coffin, but the Emperor's corpse in the Emperor's coffin had already vanished. Only an empty coffin was left. In the mural, Feng Chuyun's figure was also becoming faint. Only the Mother Earth primordial sword was still considered normal. I've already started to fade into the void, so the others who boarded the ship must have too. Village Chief said. Mu'er, there's a very strong power in the heart of your brows, so you need to seal it up. Otherwise, you will fade into the void too. Only by being weak do you not pose a threat to this ship, and only then can you preserve your life. I'm old and experienced, trust me. Qin Mu took out the willow leaf and sealed his third eye. Village Chief, sever your cultivation as well. No need. Village Chief shook his head and revealed a smile. If I sever my cultivation, who is going to protect you? Also, only one person can survive in a cycle. I need to preserve my cultivation. I need to ensure it's you that is going to survive. Qin Mu's mind was blank. Village Chief patted his shoulder and said with a smile, now that Lin Zhao's identity has been exposed by us, he will definitely tell this to the others and cause us to fight each other to the death. In order not to fade into the void, the others will lay their hands on us. If I sever my cultivation, you won't be able to escape death. You are the smartest one in our village. Only if you become the final survivor can you solve the peculiar divine art on this ship, and only then can you rescue us from the void. Dragon-rearing Sovereign. He turned to Dragon-rearing Sovereign and said, you also need to remember, fading into the void isn't scary. As long as your lord is alive, he will be able to save you and me. Don't try to have any thoughts of rebelling. Otherwise, I will be the first to take your life. If you want to live, the simplest way is to ensure your lord isn't dead. After I fade into the void, you shall give it your all to protect your lord's life. Do you understand? Dragon-rearing Sovereign bowed with his fists together and said solemnly, I understand. Dragon-rearing Sovereign will follow my lord to my death. Village Chief walked forward and said solemnly, let's continue to explore this ship. We need to find more clues before we fade into the void. As they walked forward and passed by the training field, they came to the army encampment. There were palaces of all sizes where the feathered forest guards had resided. The feathered forest guards were the strongest gods in the Dragon Han era. Therefore, it was natural that their treatment was extremely good. Village Chief led them towards the most majestic palace hall, and that should be where Wei Suifeng had resided. As the left commander of the feathered forest guards, Wei Suifeng had an extremely high position, so he should have naturally lived in the most luxurious place. The pillars of the palace in front had several lines of a poem engraved onto them. The words used were God writing, and the handwriting was very delicate. It seemed like a woman had written them. Qin Mu read softly, flowers are not flowers, fogs are not fogs. Like shadowy appearances coming at midnight, leaving at first light. They come like a spring dream, but for how long? Parting nowhere to be found in the morning clouds. Isn't this poem talking about time traveling in the fog? Like shadowy appearances coming at midnight, leaving at first light. It was the same when he time traveled on the surging river. There was only half a day for him to travel back in time. He would time travel at night and return during the day. If he time traveled in the day, he would return at night. These words were left behind by Celestial Venerable Ling. She has come to this ship before. The marvel of her divine art is right in this poem. Flowers are not flowers, fogs are not fogs. Like shadowy appearances coming at midnight, leaving at first light. Qin Mu seemed to be in deep thoughts as he savored this poem over and over again. On Jade Pool meeting a million years ago, he had once researched about a divine art that could allow the substance to not change, not increase and not decrease. Even though the time they had spent together wasn't long, they had still managed to find a blurry path. Of course, Celestial Venerable Ling was the main pillar of the research, while Qin Mu and Founding Emperor were just assistants to help Celestial Venerable Ling do her deductions and also to teach her the art of creation. However, Qin Mu still knew the result of Celestial Venerable Ling's research very clearly. It was that moment that had determined the foundation of Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art. In the long years afterward, it was always Celestial Venerable Ling that had deduced and perfected this kind of divine art. From the perspective of the ghost ship, Celestial Venerable Ling had not perfected this divine art when she was executing. Thus the flaw of 36 people was left behind. Every time this ship reset time and space, there would be a flaw left behind. This flaw would result in 3 outcomes. Firstly, it would fuse the living and non-living on the ship together and transform them into a monster that wasn't human or an object. This was the reason why numerous people that had boarded the ship had grown together with the body of the ship. Secondly, the divine art would fuse with the ship and the ship would fuse with the living. This would already result in the divine art and ship to become a marvelous life form. This life form would roam through 36 different years and attack the existences on the ship that could threaten it. Thirdly, the ship would complete cycles in 36 different years, and the cycles would fade the people who board the ship into the void. In the end, they would be turned into an invisible state where they were neither living nor dead. To the people who boarded the ship, this was the strangest and most terrifying divine art. However, to Celestial Venerable Ling, this was the result of her divine art being imperfect. To the people who boarded the ship, it was strange. However, it was a flaw to her, and it wasn't what she had intended. When Celestial Venerable Ling had left this poem behind, she must have boarded this ship years later and realized her divine art was imperfect. Thus she left this poem behind which mentioned the flaw in the divine art. The chance of survival for the people on the ship doesn't lie in comprehending Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art. It was to find out the flaw in Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art in order to seek a chance of survival by solving her divine art. Qin Mu faintly grasped the direction of solving this kind of divine art. However, this feeling was too hazy, so he couldn't think through for a moment. Suddenly, terrifying pulses came from the back of the palace. After going around this palace, they saw Crimson Light Son of God fighting with the 2 retainers of Prince Qiu Ming. The bodies of Crimson Light Son of God and those 2 gods had already started to fade into void. Their corporeal bodies and primordial spirits didn't seem real, and yet their battle power was still incomparably astonishing. After Qin Mu had imparted 3 primordial spirit undying God consciousness of Crimson Emperor to him, Crimson Light Son of God had finally patched his shortcomings by cultivating 3 heads and 6 arms for his primordial spirit as well. By complementing it with Light Emperor's Enisrava creation mysterious technique, he was truly capable of killing anyone who was going to stand in his way. However, those 2 gods following Prince Qiu Ming were also extraordinary. One of the gods made a deep impression on Qin Mu with his silver rope hanging down from the moon. The silver rope was over 100,000 miles long when it hung down from the bright moon, yet they were all kept into his sleeve after they had landed. The silver rope that he was using now had become a whip instead. This silver whip was sometimes long and sometimes short as he executed all kinds of whip techniques. However, this wasn't all of the whip's transformation. The head of the whip would sometimes transform into a silver dragon that bared its fangs and brandished its claws. Sometimes it would transform into a silver spear, stabbing and attacking abruptly with a myriad of changes. The other god was also extremely powerful, so when they worked together to attack Crimson Light Son of God, they caused the palaces to collapse one after another. Village Chief suddenly said, "Their abilities are much weaker than before. Their cultivation must have faded into the void as well. Looks like the stronger you are on this ship, the more you will be weakened." Qin Mu nodded his head. Right at this moment, their hair stood on ends as they got locked on by an incomparably terrifying aura. They didn't dare to move. That was incomparably terrifying dragon awe. Village Chief cried out with a hoarse voice, "Ancestral Dragon King!" Qin Mu suddenly turned back and saw Ancestral Dragon King rushing furiously at them. He was already 100 steps away from them, and this old dragon on numinous sky realm opened its incomparably wide head, wanting to swallow them up. Yet the moment Qin Mu turned around to look at him, Ancestral Dragon King's corporeal body instantly faded into the void and turned into a hazy shadow. His abilities were extremely high and were slightly inferior to Feng Chuyun, so his condition was rather similar to Feng Chuyun. Feng Chuyun had already fused with the mural, and her body had faded so much that it was hard to see clearly. Ancestral Dragon King was slightly better than her, but not by much. If Qin Mu didn't force himself to break out of the dragon's awe to turn around, Ancestral Dragon King would remain in his unobserved stage and he wouldn't have faded into void. Yet under Qin Mu's gaze, his corporeal body and primordial spirit quickly faded into the void and his abilities were mostly gone. Ancestral Dragon King hurriedly soared up into the sky. In the next instant, he appeared behind Qin Mu, but Village Chief and Dragon-rearing Sovereign had their eyes on him. Clever. I'll let you guys off the hook this time. Ancestral Dragon King flew away, and in the next instant, Crimson Light Son of God, who was fighting with the two gods from the celestial heavens, suddenly closed his eyes. The figure of Ancestral Dragon King suddenly appeared behind the silver rope god that tore him apart. Crimson Light Son of God flipped backward and the other god received a lethal blow from Ancestral Dragon King, as he got shattered by a blow from his scepter. Crimson Light Son of God suddenly opened his eyes on all three heads, and Ancestral Dragon King had already come to his face. He fell into his line of sight and the body of this Dragon King instantly faded into void. Crimson Light Son of God brazenly made his move. Ancestral Dragon King, who was greatly weakened, coughed up blood and escaped after several moves. Crimson Light Son of God couldn't chase after him and he shouted, "Ancestral Dragon King, stop resisting. You won't last through the next reset. If I am you, I will hide properly and wait to become another when I completely fade into void. This is so I won't die." He turned around and looked at Qin Mu, Village Chief and Dragon-rearing Sovereign before walking over to them. Village Chief gripped Carefree sword tightly and his gaze landed on his footsteps. Village Chief said insipidly, "Crimson Light Son of God, if you want to escape the fate of fading into the void, the only way is to rely on the one and only Overlord body to solve the difficult problem of this ghost ship. If you killed us, you will never be able to return to your people." Crimson Light Son of God stopped and his gaze landed on Qin Mu. He said softly, "I always admire Overlord Body Qin's intelligence and talent, however, to make me give up my only chance of hope just with an Overlord body, are you treating this as child's play? Overlord Body Qin, what capabilities do you have to make me give up?" "Son of God, you can gamble." Qin Mu said, "You can gamble that I solve this ghost ship and you return alive, or you can gamble to see if you will become one of the 36 unchanging constants on this ghost ship after killing me." Crimson Light Son of God remained silent. After a moment he asked, "Crimson Emperor is in your body?" Qin Mu nodded and said, "He is only left with his consciousness currently. He has no soul or spirit." Crimson Light Son of God closed his eyes and opened them after a long time. His killing intent had faded away and he had an enlightened bearing as he said with a smile, "I can't last until the next reset before my abilities decrease drastically from fading into void. After I fade into void, you guys can only rely on yourself." Village Chief said solemnly, "Many thanks." Crimson Light Son of God said, "The danger isn't only from the ones who had boarded the ship in our batch. There are also other people who had boarded the ship from the various years. 36 people wouldn't fade into the void, but it doesn't mean these 36 people wouldn't die. When we came onto the ship, we didn't see the other unchanging constants, so they are most likely dead." Village Chief said solemnly, "I understand that Lantern has a very big problem." Crimson Light Son of God turned to leave and he said, "Ancestral Dragon King will completely fade into the void in the next reset. There are still experts outside like Divine Knife Lua Wushuang and the half-gods under Ancestral Dragon King, as well as the other people who had boarded the ship in the different cycles. I shall go and get rid of them." Village Chief saw him off. Not long later, light burst forth again and shrouded this ship once. When the light faded away, Qin Mu hurriedly looked at Village Chief and saw Village Chief fading even more. "I'm all right. After this reset, Crimson Light Son of God's abilities is probably 80 to 90% gone. Ancestral Dragon King also would have most likely faded away as well." Village Chief said, "Now Crimson Light Son of God can't protect us anymore. We can only rely on ourselves." Right at this moment, they saw a lush and dense primordial tree shrouding primordial realm outside the celestial river. Numerous gods of High Emperor era discovered this ship, and they executed their divine arts to trap this ship so they could fly up. Those people were a bunch of half-gods, and they must be the strong practitioners of North High Emperor Celestial Heavens. There was an extremely high number of half-gods, and they flooded in from all directions. There are humans and a dragon here. One of the half-gods discovered them and rushed over. Village chief revealed a smile and examined the sword in his hand. This is truly a great sword. Moor, there is the word carefree on the sword. Could this sword be named Carefree Sword? Qin Mu nodded and said solemnly, "This is Founding Emperor's sword." Village chief was stunned, and he said with a smile, "Founding Emperor? I admire him the most. I roamed around the martial world when I was young, and I encountered numerous ancient ruins. The one glorious civilization and the countless stone statues. That made me wonder how much of a hero Founding Emperor was to command such loyalty from these heroes, for them to fight their whole lives just for a dream? This is why the second form of my sword picture is called Sword of Founding Emperor. It's truly fortunate of me to be able to wield his sword." He pulled his sword and head in the directions of the enemies, vibrating his sword and singing along. The sword light was like an ocean, and it was as though the moonlight had scattered down onto the sea, while the ocean sprays were like moving silver scales. Village chief was full of metal, and it was as if he was an emperor riding on precious horses and magnificent carriage to roam the seas, quelling the chaos in the four seas. Second form of sword picture, Sword of Founding Emperor. Easterlies of the night call to bloom blossoms of 1,000 trees. His sword Tao scattered, and he was imagining the scene of Founding Emperor quelling rebellions. It was as if that emperor had encountered his enemies, and he jumped from his precious horse and magnificent carriage to swing his sword in the four directions, as if blowing adrift stars that drizzle like rain. Precious horses and lavish carriages go by, leaving a scented trail. Phoenix flutes music perform as the timekeeper witnesses the turning of hours. Throughout the night, lanterns in the shape of fish and dragons dance and gyrate. The sword lights were like scales, making them look like fish and dragons dancing and gyrating in the sea of swords. Qin Mu had also learned this move from Founding Emperor before, and the exact same sword move had a completely different mood when released by Village Chief and by him. However, the mood was also different when it was released by the Village Chief in the past and the Village Chief now. In the past, when Village Chief executed this move, mountains and rivers exist in a vast and obscure heart, but when looking around left and right, there are no more people donning the clothes of homeland. It was a lonely reminiscence of one's homeland, the long-gone martyrs. It had a mood of sorrow and heroism, and Village Chief's sword now had the confident and wild feeling of a young emperor quelling the rebellions everywhere. There was the mood of a young hero, the high spirits that he rarely had. The difference in the frame of mind, the different the experience would be. As a result, the sword Tao would also be different. He had gone through death once, and the revived Village Chief seemed as though he had returned back to his youth. He had the heart of a youth striving to do his best, and his sword Tao had swept away the mood of sorrow and heroism of the past. Replacing it was the drive and strive of a youth that was filled with heroic passion. The half-gods of North High Emperor Celestial Heavens poured over, and they died under the sword light. Village Chief was like a young emperor standing on his precious horses and magnificent carriage to cut down the invading strong practitioners. His sword Tao was evolving and becoming sharper and more initiative. It was conforming to eternal peace, the era of reform, to guide this era of reform. He was a person walking at the very front of this era. Magnificent sword skills, as expected from the strong practitioner that taught Overlord Body Qin. A thick and dull voice rang from far away, and knife light shone as a knife cleaved out a path of survival. He split apart the waves and broke through the sea of swords, slaying numerous of the half-gods from High Emperor. One-armed divine knife Luo Wushuang came over with formidable power and imposing manner as he broke through sword picture to slash at the young emperor. Eternal Peace Sword God, the Overlord Body's sword skill originates from you. I'll kill you first before killing him. He was fading into the void quite seriously, but since he was still the number one divine knife of the extraterritorial celestial heavens, after all, so his abilities were still extremely terrifying. He had entered the path with his knife and has achieved astonishing attainments in his knife skills. Village Chief's sword light transformed into calamity of the High Emperor. The sword sea surged and split the sky, clashing fiercely with Luo Wushuang. One was honored as the number one divine knife of the extraterritorial celestial heavens, and the one was honored as Eternal Peace Sword God. Both of them executed all kinds of moves that had entered the Tao, dazzling Qin Mu and dragon-rearing sovereign who were standing in the rain of sword and knives. Meanwhile, the half-gods that rushed into the knife skills and sword skills of these two experts died miserably. They couldn't withstand the clash of these two strong practitioners on such Tao realms. Suddenly, an incomparably bright light burst forth as the ghost ship reset again. Luo Wuxuang grunted and he pulled himself out to leave. In this reset, his condition had become even more serious and the situation was against him. He had to find a safe place and avoid his enemies. He had to wait for the next reset to let him completely fade into void. Village Chief pulled the sword back and he lowered his head to examine Carefree Sword while praising. Truly a magnificent sword. Luo Wuxuang is also worthy of the title of Divine Knife. If Butcher wants to catch up to him, there's still a distance. Qin Mu looked at Village Chief's body, and he saw that his corporeal body and primordial spirit were also fading into void badly. Dragon-rearing Sovereign was also slowly fading. They experienced another 2 resets and experienced another 2 more bunch of outsiders boarding the ship. Village Chief's condition was too severe, and he was already close to being unable to hold Carefree Sword anymore. Muir, the next reset is almost coming and I'm probably close to vanishing. They sat on the ridge of the palace hall and Village Chief looked at the sun rising from the east. However, you don't have to worry. Even if I completely fade into void, I will remain by your side, I won't leave you. Qin Mu nodded his head gently. I know. Dragon-rearing Sovereign, it's up to you now, protect your lord. Light burst forth once more and swallowed them up. When the light faded away, only Qin Mu and Dragon-rearing Sovereign were left. I know you are still beside me. Qin Mu stood up and looked at the unfamiliar world outside the Celestial River. I will definitely find a solution and turn you back into a physical form. You are still my grandpa Village Chief. No one can take you away. Dragon-rearing Sovereign looked at a half-god walking over from the distance. That half-god should also be a god, as its body was already half-faded. He should be a strong practitioner that was following Ancestral Dragon King, and he had been killing the others who had boarded the ship. However, this person was afraid of Village Chief and waited until Village Chief had vanished before appearing. My lord, this person's abilities are extraordinary. Dragon-rearing Sovereign jumped down from the hall and said solemnly, I shall fight to my death. I hope my lord can revive me in the future. Dragon Sovereign, don't worry. You are my Celestial River Dragon King. I won't let you die here. Qin Mu also jumped down from the palace hall and said, You will fade into the void in the next reset, and it will be the same for that half-god as well. You just need to drag the fight out until the next reset. Dragon-rearing Sovereign faced that half-god and chuckled. But I don't have the confidence. The bloodline of the dragon race in his body is higher than mine, so I can only fight him with the intention of dying together with him. The more I try to drag for time, the more likely it is that I will simply be killed by him. He roared and smacked his fist against his palm in front of his chest. His chi and blood flared up as he chuckled. Victory belongs to the strong. Back then, I was also a god that fought against human Emperor Su and didn't die under his sword. Following my lord, I became Celestial River Dragon King, and not a puny god that is raising dragons for high heavens. If you want to take my lord's life, it will be over my dead body. He fought with that half-god, and both of them transformed into 2 huge dragons to roll and fight. They controlled fire and water with their divine arts and had terrifying power. Qin Mu walked into the palace hall. Loud explosions rang out from the fight between the 2 divine dragons, and even though not many people that had boarded the ship with them were left, there were still some that had survived. He didn't manage to see Luo Wuxuang's spirit elite guards, and he didn't manage to see that Prince Cho Ming from the celestial heavens. Those people must have hidden, and since their cultivation wasn't at the god realm yet, they wouldn't fade into void yet. They could wait until the gods finished killing one another, or after they faded into the void. Qin Mu examined the palace hall. It was Wei Suifeng's palace hall. Founding Master Wei Suifeng of the Heavenly Saint cult had explored the ruins of End and experienced a peculiar time travel incident, which brought him back to the Dragon Han era. He had become the left commander of the Dragon Han Celestial Heavens Feathered Forest Guards, managing the most powerful army of gods. This big senior brother also had some understanding of Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art. When he was returning to the celestial heavens with the feathered forest guards, he realized he should be returning to his time when he encountered the fog again, so he extinguished his lamp to return. Wei Suifeng was very clever, and it was very likely that he had figured out what was lacking in Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art, allowing him to escape unscathed. Maybe I can find some clues at Big Senior Brother's place. Qin Mu examined the layout of the palace hall, and he memorized the exact location of every item before he started to search in detail. He found Founding Master's bookshelf, and on the shelf were books that were written in different languages. Some were written in the immemorial God language, some were written in the ancient God and ancient devil languages, and some were written in the human language. Qin Mu browsed through them and placed them back messily. He found the personal letters that Big Senior Brother had written using the human language. The letters recorded some trifling matters Big Senior Brother had in the Dragon Han celestial heavens. Qin Mu read through in detail, but there wasn't much useful information. However, there was a geographic map that led to the ruins of End. Qin Mu was slightly stunned. This map to the ruins of End complemented one of the geographic maps Big Senior Brother had left for him. Even though there was a slight difference to the terrain, the rest was more or less similar. One of the places Big Senior Brother wished for me to find is the ruins of End. He must have left something in the ruins of End as well, something that is definitely extremely important. Qin Mu composed himself. From the looks of it, the geographic maps that Wei Suifeng had left for him contained huge secrets and treasures. The first thing he had found was the commander's seal of the Feathered Forest Guards. The second geographic map had led him to God Qi Shi and the God Execution Mysterious Knife, but this wasn't the main point. The main point was that the result was him pulling strings to get Qin Mu to meet with the remaining survivors of Crimson Light era, allowing Eternal Peace to form an alliance with Crimson Light Son of God. The third geographic map had led Qin Mu to find the head of God ENGSUB in Supreme Brightness Heaven, receiving the complete blueprints of the Prometha Arc. Meanwhile, this geographic map was the fourth map that he knew the name of. Wei Suifeng had returned to the Dragon Han celestial heavens when he was exploring the ruins of End. He must have discovered something there and hid the secret there, waiting for Saint Woodcutter or Qin Mu to discover it. The ghost ship gave off a gentle tremor. This was the prior indication that the ghost ship was about to reset again. Qin Mu's expression changed slightly, and he hurriedly left the palace hall. He used a stone to press down on the personal letters before raising his brush to doodle on the pillar where Celestial Venerable Ling had left her poem. Once he did that, he hurriedly retreated. Outside the hall, Dragon-Rearing Sovereign was still battling that divine dragon, and the blood of dragons was splattered around. Both of them were completely into the fight, and even if the ship was going to reset, they couldn't stop themselves anymore. Light burst forth as the ghost ship left this time and space. When the light faded, Qin Mu regained his vision and saw that the personal letters he had pressed down with the stone had vanished without a trace. Qin Mu's eyes lit up, and he returned into the palace hall. He saw that the things he had placed messily earlier had returned to their original locations. Everything was neat and tidy. Qin Mu turned to walk out of the palace hall. He examined the pillar in front of the hall and saw that his doodle had vanished. However, Celestial Venerable Ling's words were still there. Qin Mu smiled and suddenly laughed loudly. A distance away, Dragon-Rearing Sovereign's opponent had vanished, and this big dragon was also completely exhausted. He was covered in injuries and his body was also about to fade away as well. He gasped for breath and asked, "What is my lord laughing about? I changed the location of some items, and after the reset, the items returned to their original positions." Qin Mu looked at the poem on the pillar with interest and said with a smile, "I even doodled on Celestial Venerable Ling's poem, and where I doodled has vanished. However, Celestial Venerable Ling's poem still remains. Do you know what this means?" Dragon-Rearing Sovereign was at a loss. "We are situated in Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art, and we can't change anything on the ship. Anything that is destroyed will return back to its original state once the ship resets. However, Celestial Venerable Ling boarded the ship afterward and changed something on the ship. She left behind a poem on the pillar." Qin Mu asked, "Why was she able to leave her poem behind?" Dragon-Rearing Sovereign was even more at a loss. He shook his head and said, "My lord, my brain is dumb. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been seized by you to become Celestial River Dragon King. The substance on the ship doesn't change, doesn't move, doesn't increase, and doesn't decrease, yet Celestial Venerable Ling could still leave behind a poem. This means that she solved her own divine art. Qin Mu said with a smile. In her poem, she described the reason behind her divine art, and when writing her poem, she used the method to solve the divine art. This also means that she hid the solution to the substance not changing, not moving, not increasing, and not decreasing in her poem. Dragon-rearing sovereign, dragon-rearing sovereign. Dragon-rearing sovereign's body became fainter and fainter. When he turned back to look, the Dragon King slowly faded away like an illusion. My lord, you will have to rely on yourself for the rest of the journey. Dragon-rearing sovereign completely vanished. Qin Mu stood there in a daze and only came back to his senses after a while. There was no one left beside him. Only he and his shadow were left. You guys are still beside me, right? I know, village chief, and you are both here, you haven't gone far. He sat down and looked at the poem on the pillar. He muttered to himself softly. Don't worry, I will find a solution. Celestial Venerable Ling thinks that time doesn't exist in this world, that it's just a hallucination from the change in substance. If a substance doesn't change, move, increase, or decrease, time doesn't exist. This is the basis of her divine art. When she was executing this divine art, she didn't perfect it and left behind a flaw. When she returned to this place, she left words on this pillar and increased the substance. In the distance, divine weapons were placed on the racks in the ghost ship's armory. Even after so many thousands of years, these divine weapons still looked brand new. The armory was very wide, and there were corpses on the ground. A knife that was currently dripping blood hung in the armory, the droplets of blood pitter-pattering down from the tip. The person who held the knife had a very steady grip. The owner of the knife was also like the corpses on the floor. It was also a one-armed youth. Junior brother Zhehuali, Teacher Luo, has already faded into the void, and there are fewer and fewer people on the ship. We, the Spirit Elite Guards, are the most outstanding disciples chosen by the descendants of the gods in the celestial heavens. Only by going through strict elimination rounds can we enter the Spirit Elite Guards. That one-armed youth looked at Zhehuali on the other side of the weapon rack and said indifferently, hundreds to thousands of people have to die in every selection in order to choose an outstanding disciple of the Spirit Elite Guards and receive the true teachings of Teacher Luo. Most of the people choose to sever one arm, as only then can we comprehend the path from Teacher Luo's knife skills. However, Teacher was biased and felt that you had the best aptitude, so he sent you to the lower bound to learn from Fu Riluo, hoping that you would walk down another path. The demon knife behind Zhehuali's back trembled, and he said solemnly, Big senior brother, you are the best at learning Teacher Luo's knife skills to the point that even I'm inferior to you. However, you are inferior to me in the knife Dao. You are only following behind Teacher Luo. Why did you have to kill so many junior brothers and junior sisters? They could have faded into the void, and they posed no threat to you. They had to die because they were weaker than me. I would fade into the void earlier than them. That one-armed youth said coldly, I need to ensure that I'm the last one alive. To enter the knife Dao, I could even sever my own arm, much less kill them. As for junior brother, I want to see what Teacher Luo saw in you. I want to see how you are better than me, and how much further you can walk ahead of me. This is why I've left you for last. Knife light shone, and in an instant, the entire armory was filled with knife light. The two youths collided, and the terrifying power activated all of the divine weapons in the armory. The power of the divine weapons burst forth and blew the whole hall into pieces. After the terrifying divine might swept past in all direction, Zhehuali raised his hand and sheathed his two knives behind his back. He walked out of the ruins and didn't bother looking at the corpse of the one-armed youth. Every step of his seemed to be perfectly measured, and the distance never changed. My knife skills have been through Overlord Bodychin's beatings and have long surpassed Teacher Luo. Not even Teacher Luo knows it, so you wouldn't either. I entered the Dao with my knife and comprehended two heavens of the knife Dao. This is my own Dao, my own skills, while you are using Teacher Luo's knife skills, Teacher Luo's knife Dao. This is why you are dead. He walked towards the camp. When he looked at Qin Mu sitting in front of the palace hall from a distance, his pupils constricted. Qin Mu seemed to sense his gaze and turned around to look at him with a smile. Shahuali couldn't help revealing a smile, and he felt apprehensive in the next moment. This rascal is using his smile to lower my guard. I can't fall for his trap. He is an enemy I have to get rid of. At that very moment, another figure appeared in the distance, and it was Prince Qiuming. Only 3 of us are left from the same batch. Prince Qiuming shook the sword in his hand, and droplets of blood splattered out. I killed several batches of people that boarded the ship later, and discovered a secret I want to tell both of you. He smiled and said, "It turns out that the unchanging constants on the ship can also die. I just killed one." Killed one of the unchanging constants? Shahuali's pupils constricted, and the demon knife behind him suddenly opened its eye to stare at Prince Qiuming. The tiny human in the lantern told them about the secret of the unchanging constants, which stirred up internal strife between the people on the ship. Shahuali had also originally suspected that the unchanging constants could be killed. He just didn't expect Prince Qiuming to actually intercept and kill the other people that had boarded the ship, even killing one of the unchanging constants. Prince Qiuming said leisurely, "I wanted to see if killing the other unchanging constants would have any effect on us. Maybe one more of us could survive. However, I realized that I've already reached the boundary of starting to fade. In the last reset, a portion of my power vanished. I'm afraid I can't test out this theory before I fade into the void." Shahuali's heart sank. He still hadn't felt himself starting to fade, which meant that the ghost ship felt that Prince Qiuming's strength was above his. That was why Prince Qiuming was weakened by the ghost ship. I don't dare sever my own cultivation because I'm afraid I would die at the hands of others. Therefore, I placed all other matters aside and came to find both of you. Prince Qiuming said with a smile, "The reason I came down to the lower bound is to get rid of Overlord Bodychin and the rest of the reformers, to eradicate the threat when it is still budding. Shahuali, you belong to the spirit elite guards of the celestial heavens, and I'm a prince of the celestial heavens. You are my subordinate, so you know what you should do. After I get rid of Overlord Bodychin, I will sever my own cultivation, and you shall fade into the void. I'll live and solve the ghost ship, and you will still have a chance at survival." Shahuali was silent, and he suddenly shook his head. "I don't believe in you, I only believe in my knife." He lifted his head and looked at Prince Qiuming. "I walk my own path, I cultivate by myself, and my life was given to me by my parents, not by the prince. Even though I belong to the spirit elite guards, I'm not a lowly life. I need to hold the life my parents gave me in my own grasp, and I can't hand it over to anyone else." Prince Qiuming frowned slightly and said, "My method is simple, to get rid of all the other unchanging constants. When only I'm left, I will end my own life." Shahuali looked at him with an astonished gaze. Prince Qiuming said, "When this ship no longer has any unchanging constants, the stability of the divine art will drop to the lowest point, and the divine art will crumble. As long as the divine art crumbles, we will be able to return to our years, and none of us will need to die. Don't worry. I'm confident that I can kill the strong practitioners from the rest of the 35 years." He was rather conceited and said, "You have learned from Luo Wushuang and Fu Riluo and have entered the knife Dao. However, what you learned are all unorthodox methods." Shahuali frowned. Prince Qiuming said, "I learned the Emperor's throne techniques of the celestial heavens, and we are personally taught by the heavenly teachers in the celestial heavens. Numerous people underestimate the disciples of the royal family, and think that we are hedonistic sons, but this is absurd. There are numerous princes, and if we want to stand out among our peers, we need to work harder than anyone else. Otherwise, a prince would just be a featherless phoenix, and that is inferior to a hen dragon. Furthermore, there is internal strife in the royal family, and they have a lot of methods, so the dangers I've met in my life are no less than you." Shahuali felt deep veneration and said solemnly, "Prince is tasked with an important task, so you must have slaughtered your way out from tens of thousands of princes." Prince Qiuming smiled and asked, "In that case, Shahuali, are you going to follow me?" "No." Shahuali said indifferently, "Even if I admire you, I won't pledge my loyalty to you, and I won't believe you. I only trust my knife. I only pledge my loyalty to my knife. Why do you peasants who rise to power always like to be conceited and contemptuous?" Prince Qiuming sighed. "I'm most annoyed by people like you, sticking your nose up in the air just because you are a little capable. You think you are so remarkable, but you don't know that I was born into a better family than you, that I'm more hardworking than you, and that my abilities are much higher than yours. However, despite all that, and despite me being here and trying to talk nice to you, you still remain so arrogant and conceited. That's because... Shahuali pulled out his knife and rushed at him. He raised the demon knife high up, and knife light filled the sky. The knife chi was like a long rainbow as he roared. When you were born, you had the position and glory. You had the achievements that we might not be able to get even if we struggle for several hundred years. His knife skill was faster and faster. His knife contained his responsibility, his hard work, and his unflinching righteousness. You think it's natural to be born into a royal family, but to us it's something that's out of reach. You feel that we are arrogant and conceited, but you don't know how many peasants died and how many bones were stepped on to walk to where we are today. You think you are very hardworking, but you don't know the hard work every one of us has put in. We also had to step on the corpses of friends and foes just to reach where we are today. To follow you, to help you become one of the unchanging constants? Shahuali's demon knife became frantic, and knife light poured out like mercury to become his brush and ink. It allowed him to write out his emotions to his heart's content. If I give up and follow you, how am I going to face the friends who died beside me? How am I going to answer to those who died under my knife? He laughed loudly and executed his great knife of Long Dao. The descendants of Celestial Emperor naturally have a higher starting point the moment they are born. How is that natural? Why can't they die? Prince Choming's sword light welcomed his knife, and he said with a smile, I heard that people who enter the knife Dao all have unique heroism. It's a pity I was born noble, and this is something I can't avoid. However, even if I was born a peasant like you, I would also be able to rise up and achieve meteoric success. It's not confidence, it's... His sword light suddenly burst forth, and it was like countless silver needles weaving rapidly. Every silver needle countered every knife light from Shahuali precisely, and they blocked all the knife light. There was no sword in Prince Choming's hand, and his body suddenly trembled. 49 heavenly Dao appeared behind his back, and he pushed forward. A terrifying divine art burst forth, an overwhelming power pushed towards Shahuali's demon knife. The palace halls in the camp broke down into pieces and crumbled under the power of his divine art. Shahuali grunted and coughed up blood. He executed the second form of his demon knife to slash apart the heavenly Dao. Chi chi chi. Silver needles pierced through the front of his chest and came out from his back, splattering blood in all directions. Prince Choming's body shook, and the apparition of a devil god with a bull's horns, a tiger's face, a human body, and a bull's tail appeared and struck out with a punch. Rolling Yudu Devil Chi transformed into a divine art of the devil path, and a huge fist with countless silver needles smashed into Shahuali's body. It overwhelmed Shahuali and smashed him into the palace hall that was in front of Qin Mu. Half of the palace hall was crushed by his punch. Prince Choming pulled back his hand and walked over with his hands behind his back. His footsteps didn't touch the ground, and he walked 3 feet above the air. He was untainted by dust, and he said indifferently, You have worked hard all your life, comprehended the knife Dao, and finally entered the knife Dao. This is truly laughable. No matter how hard you work, you will never be as high as my starting point. I used 3 moves just now, and they were great divine arts of 3 kinds of Emperor's Throne techniques. Each one of the techniques is a divine technique that you can only dream of getting. Even if you work hard your whole life, it's impossible for you to create such a technique, yet they are easily obtainable for me. Shahuali crawled out from the collapsed palace hall and propped himself up on his demon knife. He gasped for his breath heavily, and blood was foaming at his mouth. His body was swaying, and he seemed like he could collapse at any moment. He wanted to fight, but his injuries were too heavy. He already had no more strength to fight. Prince Choming continued to walk over. He looked at the struggling Shahuali and revealed a slight smile. A true Emperor's Throne technique can allow you to comprehend Tao in the midst of your cultivation involuntarily, and comprehend divine arts of the path involuntarily. Even if my comprehension wasn't enough, the heavenly teachers of my celestial heavens would take the initiative to create an environment for me to enter the Tao, guiding me into the Tao. He said leisurely, You guys worked painstakingly and struggled between life and death in order to do so. Yet you don't know how laughable it is for so many people like you to die just to enter a mere Tao. You are right, this is natural. He suddenly stopped in his tracks and looked at Qin Mu, who was standing up. The pillar in front of Qin Mu was already shattered from the battle earlier. Without Celestial Venerable Ling's poem in front of him, he had an unpleasant face. So Overlord Body Qin is also like this. Prince Qiuming said with a smile, "You are thriving in the lower bound, and others call you Cult Master and Overlord Body, but in the eyes of the celestial heavens, you are all swine rolling in the mud, shrimp struggling to survive in a small pond." He had a slightly pitiful gaze. To the celestial heavens, the so-called Overlord Body, the so-called saint that appears once every 500 years, and the so-called reform of eternal peace are all just a joke. You are all basically grasshoppers hopping around in an urn that could be squashed to death any time. Even though my words hurt, this is the truth. Qin Mu opened his palm, and his sword pellet flew out to spin in his palm as he walked forward. Prince Qiuming walked over and said with a smile, "Overlord Body Qin, the reason I came down to the lower bound this time is to crush you grasshoppers. Now is a good time to get rid of you first." On his right hand, Qin Mu's index finger and middle finger came together as he clutched a sword technique. Raising his hand to tap on the heart of his brows, the sword pellet flew out from his sack and floated 3 inches in front of the heart of his brows to spin furiously. Prince Qiuming smiled. Countless silver needles flew to him and collided in his hand to form a treasure sword. Qin Mu's speed became faster and faster until he suddenly stabbed forward. A brilliant sword pillar stretched over 10 miles. Qin Mu's body shook, and he revealed his 3 heads and 6 arms. The other 2 right hands also raised up in succession to tap on the heart of his brows. The second and third sword pillar arrived one after another. Prince Qiuming roared and also revealed 3 heads and 6 arms. The heart of his brows on all 3 heads split open and revealed his third eyes. His aura was also stronger than before, and his divine arts were even fiercer than before. In an instant, he executed the great divine art from 3 types of Emperor's Throne techniques. The 3 types of divine art were different, and their power burst forth as he took down the 3 opening calamity swords with brute force. Suddenly, countless flying swords paused in the air and began to jump around in strange and unpredictable trajectories in front of his 9 eyes. This caused his divine arts to miss. The second form of calamity sword, raising calamity, chi-chi-chi, sounds of swords piercing through his corporeal body rang out, and Prince Qiuming was covered in flying swords. His eyes revealed a look of astonishment. Xuandu God King's body. He suddenly roared, and light flowed throughout his body. It was another kind of Emperor's Throne technique, and it was a god technique from Xuandu widely known for the corporeal body. Light swirled around his corporeal body as flying swords were forced out of his body. Yet, in that instant he saw Qin Mu's fist coming straight toward his face. Return of 1,000 palms beyond the strange peaks of heaven smashed ruthlessly on his body, and even Xuandu God King's body couldn't withstand the impact. Prince Qiuming heard the sound of his bones cracking, and this sound was coming from his chest. The cracking sounds quickly spread to his ribs, and his 24 ribs exploded out the front of his chest, exploding all the way to his backbone. He went flying backwards. He looked forward and saw Qin Mu's body coming to his face. He was currently lifting the golden willow leaf off the heart of his brows. When the willow leaf was open, Qin Mu's third eye was revealed. Qin Mu's footsteps swirled around him, and every time he took a step, the third eye on one of the heads would shoot a beam of light out into Prince Qiuming's third eye. As he took another step, another head shot out another beam. Qin Mu circled around him in 3 steps, and each head shot out a beam to pierce through Prince Qiuming's head. Boom! Prince Qiuming crashed into the ground and stumbled backwards. He had to retreat dozens of steps before he could stabilize his body. Countless silver needles flew over and formed a sword in his hand again. The tip of the sword pointed diagonally to the ground. "You!" He looked at Qin Mu, and his 3 heads suddenly exploded. His headless body swayed before collapsing in the dust. "How dare you destroy my pillar and make me unable to read my poem in peace?" Qin Mu snorted. "And you still have so many things to say. Now I have to wait until the next reset to see the poem on the pillar. And it's all your fault. My grandpa Def hates people like you the most. Bah! I'll beat you to death." Shahuali looked at Qinmu walking over and tried his best to stand up straight. He raised his hand and said, "Cult Master Qin, please." Qinmu was puzzled. What? Shahuali had a serious expression. To be able to die under Cult Master's sword is way better than dying at the hands of Prince Qiuming. I have no complaints if I die by your hands. Qinmu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He shook his head and said, "Shahuali, you are mistaken." Shahuali had a blank look on his face. "I'm not here to kill you. In fact, it would be very troublesome for me if you die here." Qinmu walked up and pulled him out from the debris while explaining, "There's a poem on this pillar, and it's the crux to solving the divine art of the ghost ship. If you stand there, you will become one with the pillar after the ghost ship reconstructs itself. If I slash you to death, your blood will smudge the words. Wouldn't that mean I would have to wait for another reset? If you want to die, die further away." Shahuali grunted and stared at his hands. He saw Qinmu holding a bottle of dragon saliva in his hand, and he was currently applying the dragon saliva on his wounds. "Cult Master Qin, you are currently treating my injuries," reminded Shahuali. Only then did Qinmu come back to his senses and throw him onto the ground. He mumbled, "Healers treat their patients like their parents would. I was just moving out of habit." Shahuali's wounds hurt as he got thrown onto the ground, but he realized that all his wounds had already been treated by Qinmu. His wounds were currently healing, and they were no longer bleeding. "You still saved me." He had a complicated feeling in his heart. "Cult Master Qin, you should know that we are enemies. You and I were both born peasants, and what we have today was fought for with our bare hands. Therefore, I would definitely have no grudge dying at Cult Master's hands. Let us have a battle of Tao. Let me truly be defeated in your hands. Let me die in your hands." Qinmu shook his head and said, "Shahuali, you are really mistaken. How were you and I born peasants? Compared to Prince Qiuming, we can be considered peasants, but if we are compared to ordinary people, we are people who were born with a silver spoon in our mouths. You are the descendant of a god and have an outstanding aptitude. You have Luo Wushuang teaching you, as well as a devil god such as Fu Riluo teaching you. Which ordinary person could have the conditions you have?" Shahuali was slightly stunned. Qinmu said, "Even though I'm an abandoned baby from the great ruins, I have the 9 elders of disabled elderly village teaching me, 9 outstanding teachers. Furthermore, I'm also the son of Yudu and the descendant of founding emperor. There's also my background and status even though they don't help much. In addition, I'm also the overlord body." He shook his head. "How can we be considered peasants? The true peasants are those ordinary people whose parents slogged day and night yet still couldn't fill their stomachs. Living in such a family, 3 meals a day is a problem, and trying to survive is also a problem. Some places are covered with tigers and wolves, so the parents might not even live to return at night after searching for food in the morning. The people born here are still trying to work hard in the struggle, trying their best to climb and scale upwards. These people are the peasants." He said calmly, "Such a person doesn't have our conditions and doesn't have our opportunities and background. They will experience many pits, many traps, and life and death struggles before finally achieving success. We aren't considered heroes among the peasants, they are." Shahuali stood up and lowered his head to think. He nodded his head and said, "Cult Master Qin is extremely right. Compared to them, we are the ones that look like the disgusting Prince Qiuming. Eternal Peace's reform is trying to change this situation." Qinmu had a fervent gaze and he said, "The goal of Eternal Peace's reform is to employ everyone's talent to the fullest and make the best use of everything. Everyone can receive sufficient education with the popularization of primary schools and colleges. By imparting the paths, skills, and divine arts, it allows peasants to encounter fewer bumps in the road during their journey to become a hero, allowing everyone to unleash their potential and talent." He was slightly excited. This reform is so that the gods won't remain high above. Instead, they will have their own professions, working to the best of their abilities. Thinking about it, the future Eternal Peace will have flying ships in the sky with supplies coming to and fro, and it will be extremely sumptuous. Everyone will be able to talk to one another from tens of thousands of miles away. They will be able to reach for the stars and dive into the deep seas to catch turtles, unleashing their talent to their heart's content. They will even be able to build luxurious buildings and communicate with the different heavens, the different worlds. There will be gorgeous art and countless people to contribute their own intelligence to improve the life of the people. Zhehuali. Zhehuali stared at him dumbfoundedly, and Qin Mu said fervently, "Have you heard of the Heavenly Saint cult?" Zhehuali opened his mouth and eyes wide. "Let's do it together." Qin Mu grabbed his shoulders and shook him forcefully. "Let's carve out a cause together. No matter how much you struggle, how high can you climb in that corrupted celestial heavens? Even if you reach the top, you will merely be like Luo Wushuang, becoming the leader of the spirit elite guards. There will still be countless nobility above you, and you will still have to lower your head when you meet someone like Prince Chou Min. The future of eternal peace is different. You can have a higher responsibility and even more possibilities." Zhehuali started to feel giddy from his shaking, and he tried to stabilize himself. It was also to stabilize his Tao heart. "Cult Master Qin, let me consider it for a moment." Qin Mu let go of him and gripped his fists tightly to cheer him on. He whispered beside his ear, "Think about your dream. Look into your inner heart, and think about what you want to pursue." Zhehuali's head was muddled. He felt that what Qin Mu said was very good, and it had infected his heart, so he subconsciously nodded. "I also feel that the lower bound is much more interesting than the upper bound. However, we are trapped on this ghost ship now, and we probably can't live to get out, so what's the point of talking about this?" Qin Mu said with a smile, "We can get out. Haven't you noticed? I'm stronger than both you and Prince Chou Ming, but I haven't faded yet." Zhehuali grunted and felt that he had agreed too early. This rascal doesn't know that thing called humility. Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art turned this ship into a ghost ship, and even though the divine art looks powerful, it was still built on the basis of creation divine art. This divine art reverses the substance and causes the substance to remain in an unmoving state, or to even reverse the flow of the substance. However, when she executed her divine art, her divine power wasn't enough, and she didn't truly accomplish this. Light burst forth once more and drowned them. Qin Mu's eyes sparkled and he was very excited. He walked around in the light as he explained things to Zhehuali. The substance of the ghost ship is still changing, but when it reaches the limit, the divine art bursts forth from the ghost ship to readjust the substance of the ghost ship, returning it back to the most primitive state. The light faded, and the destroyed palaces returned back to normal. The pillar with the poem had also returned to its original state. Qin Mu still had no signs of fading, and he was even walking around Zhehuali in excitement. This kind of adjustment brings about a shift in time and space, and only after time traveling 36 times does this divine art finish a full loop. The 36 resets are 36 small cycles. Therefore, after going through 36 small cycles, it would be a big cycle returning us to the starting point. Do you understand if I simplify it like this? Zhehuali stared with his eyes wide open. His gaze was blank, and he only came back to his senses after a moment. He hurriedly shook his head. Qin Mu continued to explain. I allowed myself to follow the frequency of a substance similar to the ghost ship so the divine art from Celestial Venerable Ling would think that I'm part of the ghost ship. That way I won't fade. Therefore, among those of us who boarded this ship, the ones who can stay will be you and me. Do you understand now? Zhehuali stared with his eyes wide open again. The demon knife behind him also stared with a blank look. I understand. Zhehuali's expression returned to normal and he said firmly, listening to one sentence from you surpasses studying for 10 years. Cult Master Qin's wisdom is truly supreme. Impressive. Qin Mu was very gratified. The demon knife behind Zhehuali's back was still in a daze. It hadn't come back to its senses. If I say I don't understand, isn't he going to underestimate me again? Zhehuali thought to himself. Facing these maniacs in research, I have to act like I know even if I don't. Anyway, the fact that I have shallow knowledge won't be revealed as long as I don't interrupt. And there's one excellent chance to leave this ship. Qin Mu became more and more excited. And that's when the change in substance is at its most violent. Which is the most violent period? That would be the first time the ghost ship time travels. At that time, all of the feathered forest guards on the ship faded into the void, and the ghost ship also faded into the void. If my guess is correct, I'm afraid that Black Tortoise, Vermilion Bird, Green Dragon and White Tiger, these 4 ancient great deities, also boarded the ship at that time, leaving behind their seals. Shahuali rubbed his palms and praised, "Brother Qin is truly outstanding." The demon knife behind his back was still in a daze. Qin Mu said in delight, "Senior brother Shahuali is truly the one who understands me. You got it immediately." When the 4 deities came to investigate the feathered forest guards traveling through time, they boarded the ship and invoked the huge change in the substance of this ship. The feathered forest guards faded into the void completely and fell into a state where they couldn't be observed. The divine art of celestial venerable Ling completely burst forth and clashed with the 4 deities. At that point in time, we will borrow the power of the 4 deities to solve celestial venerable Ling's divine art. As long as it's solved, we will be able to rescue those people who faded into the void and return back to our own time. Shahuali only understood the last sentence, and he asked with a face full of smiles, "Cult Master Qin, what should we do?" "Preserve our lives." Qin Mu's expression was solemn and he said faintly, "Preserve our lives in this period of time. Am I right, Lin Xiao?" Shahuali felt astonished and he looked around. Suddenly, his gaze fell onto a lantern hanging on the ship mast. The door on the lantern opened up, and a tiny bird-headed human stood inside. Behind him was his bright sun. That tiny human rubbed his palms together and praised, as expected of Celestial Venerable Mu, one of the 9 great Celestial Venerables. "In just a few small cycles you have thought of the solution. I've tried Prince Cho Ming's method of killing all of the unchanging constants, but it didn't work. The only way to break free of this ship is probably your method," Qin Mu said with a smile. "Yet, as Celestial Empress trusted aide, you can't let anyone escape this ship to prevent the secret from getting out." The tiny human sighed. "That is the reason. All of the unchanging constants have to die, they must die." Qin Mu suddenly asked, "In that case, Lin Xiao, do you still remember how many cycles you have been on this ship for?" The tiny human in the lantern was slightly stunned, and he didn't understand what Qin Mu was asking. Qin Mu said with a smile, "Every time this ship goes through a small cycle, there will be a batch of people boarding the ship. This shows that the people on the ship won't truly die. After they die or fade into the void, they will still come back to life after the next big cycle and board the ship again. The substance on this ship is constant. It won't increase, decrease, change, or move. This is Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art. In that case, when you bring Zhu Wuchen on board this ship again, would the you now still exist?" The light in the lantern suddenly became incomparably intense, and the tiny bird-headed human became slightly impatient and uneasy. Qin Mu smiled and said leisurely, "When that time comes, the you now will vanish and become the you who had just come on board. You will bring Zhu Wuchen on board with your comrades and repeat everything you had done. How many times have you repeated that now?" The tiny human in the lantern smiled. "I remember all of the cycles." "No, you don't." Qin Mu revealed a look of disdain. "If you remember, I would remember how many big cycles I have been through. All of the unchanging constants would. Yet they were killed time and again by you, so you obviously don't remember. And they obviously don't remember either. The only one with some memory is Dragon Count, which is that crazy old dragon that has fused with this ship. However, even his memory isn't complete." The pupils of the tiny human in the lantern contracted, and he suddenly laughed and clucked like a hen. "Yet you are about to die very soon. After 36 cycles, you will be revived and be killed by me once again." The light in the lantern shone brightly as the sun inside swirled. A terrifying wave swept over and shattered where Qin Mu stood into smithereens. The tiny human in the lantern rushed over and saw that Qin Mu and Shahuali had vanished. Qin Mu executed his teleportation divine art to teleport away with Shahuali. He said quickly, "This guy has severed his cultivation, but he is still as strong as a god. He could take one of village chief's blows and not die. We need to find a safe place to hide until he resets. When that time comes, he won't remember us anymore." Suddenly, a beam of light swept over and vaporized everything it passed by. The tiny human in the lantern chuckled. "Hide? I know this ship like the back of my hand. Where can you hide?" Shahuali shook his head and said, "Cult Master Qin, if we work together, can you not kill the hen dragon?" Qin Mu was stunned and looked him carefully in the eyes before shaking his head. If I work together with Su Shanghua, I can fight a god. However, you aren't Su Shanghua. Zhehuali grunted, and his fighting spirit was ignited. I'm inferior to Su Shanghua? Don't underestimate me. Work together with Zhehuali to kill a god? Qin Mu muttered to himself irresolutely. He and Su Shanghua knew each other very well, and they were both individuals with outstanding intelligence, so they could usually predict what each other was going to do next and follow up accordingly. Even without practicing beforehand, their coordination was impeccable, so they could fight together to get rid of a strong opponent. As for Zhehuali, Qin Mu wasn't worried about the power of his knife skills and knife Dao. He was only worried about whether Zhehuali could catch up to his train of thoughts like Su Shanghua could. If he couldn't, it would be hard for the coordination to be perfect. It was fine if they were facing ordinary gods. However, Lin Xiao had an extremely high realm, and it was he who severed his cultivation to drop his cultivation to the realm of honored god. Even though his realm had fallen, his horizons and knowledge far surpassed any other honored god. Therefore, he was able to escape from village chief's sword. Furthermore, the cultivation that he had severed had turned into a small sun inside the lantern, and the sun contained terrifying energy that could burn a huge hole in village chief's sword picture. For the energy in the small sun to not decrease until now, one could imagine how strong Lin Xiao was when he was at his peak. If their coordination was bad, they would definitely be killed by him. Suddenly, Qin Mu executed his teleportation divine art once more, and a beam of light shone over from the back, vaporizing where they had just hidden. That lantern flew over, and the tiny human inside the lantern checked around, but he couldn't find any traces of them. He chuckled and said, "Where can you guys hide? I know the ins and outs of the whole ship. There's nowhere for you to escape to. Nowhere for you to hide." The tiny human flew out from the lantern and landed on the ridge of the palace hall. He flapped his wings and the lantern exploded open. The sun inside rolled out, and he grabbed it under his claws. His body swelled up in the wind, and the sun under his feet was also becoming bigger. His body size soon grew to be 300 yards tall. He had a chicken head, human body, and dragon scales on his neck, while the feathers on his back had various colors. He flapped his wings furiously and raised his head to crow. Crow of the rooster, break of dawn. The small sun under his claw also transformed into a 300 yards big sun and grew brighter and brighter as he crowed. The golden rays that were 10,000 fathoms long shone like flying swords sweeping out in all directions. Chi chi chi. The palace halls on the ghost ship got pierced by the golden rays from the big sun, and they were covered in holes. The ground got pierced until it looked like a broken sieve. Lin Xiao flapped his wings, and the sun under his feet rolled with his body. The golden light swept down and raised the palaces to the ground. They were then lit up by the intense light and burst into flames. Lin Xiao swept everything in his way and said with a smile, "Celestial Venerable Mu, there's no need to hide, come out quickly." On the other side, light twinkled. Qin Mu and Zhehuali suddenly appeared in the palace hall where Celestial Empress' coffin was placed. Lin Xiao will soon find his way here. Qin Mu placed Zhehuali down and quickly roamed around the hall. "Zhehuali, how is your sense of space?" Zhehuali was slightly stunned and didn't understand what he meant. He said honestly, "Even though my knife skills are upright, I need an extremely strong sense of space in order to execute it. You and I have fought before, so you should know my knife light requires precise calculation in every foothold of space. Only then can I ensure my knife skills are completely perfect when I execute them." Qin Mu nodded his head, and he suddenly stopped. He stomped the ground forcefully. Zhehuali looked at him and saw vital qi flowing out under his feet. The vital qi transformed into rune markings and was imprinted on the ground as he moved. These runes were very complicated and there was too much logic involved. Zhehuali didn't really understand. Qin Mu moved to the front, back, left, and right, walking over and over again in an area of 20 yards. Suddenly, there was a loud kacha, and a tunnel appeared in the ground, which led to the hold of the ship. Zhehuali was stunned. Qin Mu had already walked into the tunnel, and he waved at him. He hurriedly followed after him and said with a soft voice, "Cult Master Qin, how did you know there was a gate here? This ship should have been designed by my big senior brother, and the layout is quite similar to the flying ship of my heavenly saint cult. According to the layout of my house, the tunnel leading to the hold of the ship should have been right here, so I tested it." Qin Mu said with a smile. I have forged flying ships for Eternal Peace Empire before, so I'm very clear about the layout of the ship. Shahuali was silent and he suddenly asked, Cult Master Qin, what haven't you done before? They arrived inside the hold of the ship and were stunned by the majestic sight in front of them. He saw huge dragon bones lined from the south to the north, passing through the inside of the body. Even though the huge dragon was only left with its bones, they were still glowing a brilliant gold, and they lit up the entire inside of the ship. Other than dragon bones, there were also ribs of a Kuan inside, and the thick rib bones of the Kuan were arranged on top of the dragon bones. There were all kinds of strange beast runes appearing on the Kuan bones, and when these runes lit up, they looked very eye-catching in the golden light of the dragon bones. And the roof, which should be below the deck, was lined with phoenix feathers of various colors. They were like rainbow clouds in the sky. Great ship! Both of them praised in unison. Qin Mu stopped in his footsteps and took out his sword pellet to examine the surroundings. I have never made a child before. Imperial Preceptor showed me a book on how to make a child, and the man and woman inside were so shameful. He tilted his head and blushed when he thought of the man and woman in the book. Shahuali and the demon knife opened their eyes wide and gave off an expression of not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Qin Mu's finger flicked gently, and a silver line flew out to measure the internal space of the ghost ship. He measured the length and circumference of the dragon bones and Kuan bones, and soon he got all the data he needed. There was light shining from outside the tunnel as Lin Xiao controlled the big sun to fly above this palace hall. The sword light of the sun destroyed the palace hall recklessly. In just a while more, the hall was going to collapse and the tunnel would be revealed. Qin Mu grabbed the sword pellet in his hands and closed his eyes. After a moment, he suddenly opened his eyes and gripped tightly. The sword pellet transformed into a treasure sword. He stepped on the air and rose up, sprinting inside the body of the ship with his sword in hand. He was graceful, and his sword was like a swimming dragon as he executed all kinds of sword moves. He was like a heroic scholar with his sword as his brush, splashing ink on the dragon bones and Kuan bones. With the body of the ship as paper, he scattered writings and set his feelings free. Soon he flew to the sky, and his body was moving parallel to the domed roof. His sword was fast as he imprinted runes between the gaps of the rainbow feathers. Whoosh! Qin Mu landed from midair. When his body was 10 yards away from the ground, his wrist trembled as he swung his sword to right on the ground. Sounds of swords slashing rang out non-stop. The internal space of the ghost ship was extremely vast, and it stretched for 300 yards. Qin Mu stuck close to the ground, and his sword lights rained down. Soon he moved from south to north and wrote down a series of runes. His figure suddenly stopped and he hung in midair. Shahuali looked around and saw all kinds of runes marked clearly on the dragon bones from the south to the north. On the domed roof were also pictures constructed by runes that moved from the south to the north. There were also 2 bones that were imprinted with runes by him. However, the body of the ship was simply too huge. Qin Mu could only imprint a small section with runes, so there were still many places that weren't imprinted. Cult Master Qin, what's the purpose of doing this? Shahuali was puzzled. Qin Mu's chest heaved up and down violently. It was evident that he was extremely exhausted. The treasure sword in his hand suddenly shrunk into a sword pellet. The sword pellet suddenly burst forth. Countless sword lights filled the space inside the ship, and the sword light traveled back and forth. The runes that Qin Mu had imprinted lit up and dazzled their eyes. It was as if the flying swords had activated the power inside the runes. The light from countless runes shone onto the sword lights that were flying and got reflected by the flying swords. In the sky, the land, and the walls on the left and right, more and more runes appeared. The runes were also becoming more and more complicated. Shahuali was dumbfounded. All of the sword lights suddenly vanished and transformed into a furiously spinning sword pellet that stopped in front of the heart of Qin Mu's brows. Meanwhile, inside the ship, countless runes were still dancing in the sky. Qin Mu's clutched sword fingers on both his left and right hands. His index finger and middle finger were put together, while his thumb was pressed down on his ring finger and pinky finger. The sword fingers on his right hand were vertical in front of the heart of his brows. The sword fingers on his left hand were tilted up and lifted the wrist of his right hand. Both hands slowly sank downwards. At the same time, apparitions of arms appeared from the back of his body, and it was as if he had grown 1,000 arms that were all clutching different sword techniques. They slowly assembled and fused with his 2 arms in succession. In the end, the apparitions of the 1,000 arms vanished. "Stop!" Qin Mu gave a low shout, and in the huge space inside the ship, the scuttling runes nailed into the sky, land, and 4 halls in succession. These runes gradually darkened, and 72 pictures appeared, each of them being different from the rest. Qin Mu gasped for breath as he landed from the sky. He half knelt on the ground, and his vital qi was severely exhausted. "Cult Master Qin, you have broken down your sword Dao and struck it into the space inside the ship?" Shahuali looked at the 72 murals that were gradually fading away and said solemnly, "That's not right. It's not only the divine art of sword Dao, there's also the divine art of martial Dao, the divine art of formation skills, the divine art of knife skills, and there's also the divine art of magnetism. I've seen the divine art of magnetism over at Mother Earth's place. You even use the divine art of painting Dao to transform into 72 paintings, which are a total of 72 divine arts. The 72 divine arts formed a chain of killing formations. Your learnings are so mixed." Qin Mu nodded his head. He executed the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique and tried his best to recover his vital qi. His voice was slightly hoarse now. "Now that the formation is laid out and my vital qi is exhausted, I can only rely on you. Shahuali, do you have the confidence to fuse into my 72 murals and sever the head of that hen dragon?" Shahuali took in a deep breath and said calmly, "The battle of killing a god to slay Lin Xiao, Cult Master Qin has already completed 90%. All that's left is for me to sever his head with my knife. If I can't take his head, how would I have the face to compete with Su Shanghua? To even compete with you?" Qin Mu revealed a smile. Right at this moment, loud explosions rang out continuously from the tunnel, and Lin Zhao's voice traveled into their ears. He said with a smile, "I've been on this ship for so long, and I still haven't found a tunnel to enter inside the ship. Never would I expect Celestial Venerable Mu to find it." "Celestial Venerable Mu, how impressive. Truth be told, when I heard you tell that sword god that you were Celestial Venerable Mu, I was also stunned. I would never have expected to actually catch a big fish here." He was ineffably excited. Intense light traveled over as Lin Xiao flapped his wings to fly. The rolling sun under his feet burst into the ship with a whoosh, and the scorching light transformed into beams of sword light to shoot out in all directions. Suddenly, the sword light paused in the sky, and the golden swords formed by the rays actually remained still in the air. Lin Xiao spread his wings and slowly landed on the big sun. His claws gripped tightly onto the big sun, and he looked excitedly at both of them. Hum hum hum. The big sun vibrated, and even more golden swords appeared in front to lock onto Qin Mu and Jahuali. "Celestial Emperor and the gods bestowed you, Hao Ling, Yu Hua, Yu Yun, Mu and Qin, the 9 celestial venerables that all had extraordinary attainments." Lin Xiao stared at Qin Mu and ignored Jahuali. The reputation of the 9 celestial venerables is simply too big. Celestial Venerable Hao is already Celestial Emperor Hao, and he controls the Heaven Han celestial heavens, while the other few celestial venerables are also extraordinary. Only Celestial Venerable Mu and Celestial Venerable Qin's whereabouts are always unknown. Both of you will appear once in a while, but I would never expect to actually find Celestial Venerable Mu, who had come from the future generation on this ship. Cluck cluck cluck. Shahuali had a blank look on his face. Qin Mu said indifferently, "I don't know what you are proud of. Lin Xiao, do you know that you are merely a dish in the future?" "Bullshit." The dragon scales on Lin Zhao's neck flared up, and feathers popped out under the scales. His corporeal body quickly swelled up and he chuckled. "Hen dragons are the descendants of golden hen and divine dragons. We control the course of the sun, and our bloodline is noble and high above. You humans are the dishes on the table. Attack!" Qin Mu shouted, and the entire inside of the ship became incomparably bright. The power of 72 pictures burst forth in that instant. One of the formations was a magnetism divine art, so in that instant, Lin Zhao's corporeal body became incomparably heavy as though Mount Meru after Mount Meru was pressing down on him. He and his big son crashed into the ground from the pressure. The rest of the formations burst forth, and all kinds of terrifying great divine arts bombarded the suppressed Lin Xiao from all directions. The space inside the ship was nearly torn apart by these abnormally powerful divine arts, and after those divine arts flew past, space would be warped. Space overlapped into countless shapes and made it hard for people to walk. Shahuali pulled out his demon knife and roused his cultivation. With his knife entering the Tao, he reached his peak in an instant. At this moment, the light of a formation shone down on his body, and that was a teleportation formation. Shahuali seemed to get teleported into a world inside a painting, and then that painting moved up and down in the space that was trembling violently. Now he understood why Qin Mu had asked him how his sense of space was. At this moment, he had completely lost his sense of direction from the torment of the teleportation divine art. Shahuali resisted the urge to vomit. He executed his demon knife furiously while raising his cultivation furiously as well. Swoosh! His figure appeared beside the bird-headed god that was covered in injuries, and Shahuali roared angrily. Taking a step forward, he raised his knife and poured out all of his power from the knife. There was still a glint of astonishment in Lin Zhao's eyes. Next, his head flew up as his god blood poured out.